Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Redhawk, but most folks call me Tom. I've been a park ranger in Alaska for 13 years now, and I've seen things that would make city people pack up and head home. But nothing prepared me for what happened that February in 1982. I'm half Athabascan, half Irish. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the Kushtaka when I was little. Shape-shifting creatures that looked like otters but could walk like men. She said they stole people's souls and made them into monsters like themselves. I used to think they were just stories to keep kids from playing near the water. After 2 tours in Vietnam, I came back to Alaska to find some peace. The wilderness called to me like it called to my ancestors. I started working for the Park Service in Denali, way out in the Kantishna district. It's about as remote as you can get, 6 hours by snowmobile to the nearest ranger station, and that's in good weather. I specialize in winter search and rescue. When someone goes missing in the Alaska wilderness during the dark months, they call me. I've pulled dozens of people out of avalanches, found lost hikers half frozen in the snow, and talked panicked tourists through radio contact until help arrived. I thought I'd seen every way the wilderness could try to kill you. The call came in on February 14th, 1982. Valentine's Day, though romance was the last thing on anyone's mind. A research team from the University of Alaska had gone missing near Wonder Lake. 4 graduate students studying wolf behavior. Their last radio check-in was 72 hours earlier, and they were supposed to be back at base camp the day before. "Tom, we need you out there," said my supervisor over the radio. "Weather's been hell, but it's supposed to clear up enough for you to get through." I loaded my snowmobile with gear, extra food, medical supplies, emergency shelter, and enough fuel for a week-long search if needed. The temperature was sitting at -45 degrees, and the wind was howling at 60 miles per hour. Not the kind of weather you want to be lost in. Wonder Lake sits 85 miles from the park entrance, deep in the heart of Denali. It's surrounded by thick spruce forest and granite cliffs that rise up like the walls of a fortress. During winter, the lake freezes solid, at least 3 feet of ice that could support a truck. But the local Athabascans never go there in February. They call it the Hungry Moon, and say bad things happen when the spirits get desperate for food. My grandmother warned me about that place more than once. "The water spirits there are old and angry," she'd say. "They remember when the world was different." I'd always figured it was just superstition. After surviving firefights in the jungle, after patching up wounded soldiers and watching good men die, I believed in things I could see and touch. Bullets were real, blood was real, the cold that could kill you in minutes was real. Ghost stories were for children. The ride out to Wonder Lake took me 4 hours through the worst weather I'd seen all winter. The wind tried to knock me off the snowmobile every few minutes, and the snow was coming down so hard I could barely see 10 feet ahead. My headlight carved out a tiny bubble of visibility in a world gone completely white. When I finally reached the research team's base camp, the first thing that struck me was how quiet everything was. The wind had suddenly stopped, like someone had thrown a switch. After hours of constant howling, the silence felt wrong. Their camp was still there, 3 bright orange tents arranged in a triangle around a central fire pit. But something felt off. I killed my engine and listened. No voices, no movement. Just that unnatural quiet that made my skin crawl. "Hello," I shouted. "This is Park Ranger Tom Redhawk. Is anyone here?" Nothing answered but the echo of my own voice bouncing off the cliffs. I approached the camp carefully, every sense on high alert. 13 years of wilderness work had taught me to trust my instincts, and right now they were screaming that something was very wrong. The tents were zipped shut but undamaged. No tears, no signs of a struggle. The equipment was neatly arranged, cooking gear cleaned and stacked, research materials organized in waterproof cases. It looked like the team had just stepped out for a quick walk, but there were no footprints leading away from the camp. Fresh snow had fallen during the night, but not enough to completely cover tracks that were only hours old. 4 people couldn't just vanish without leaving a trace. I unzipped the first tent and looked inside. The sleeping bags were gone, along with all the personal clothes. But the expensive scientific equipment was still there. GPS units, radio gear, cameras worth thousands of dollars. Nobody abandoning camp would leave that stuff behind. That's when I noticed the coffee pot sitting by the cold fire pit. I touched it with my gloved hand and almost jumped back. It was warm. Not hot, but warm enough that the coffee inside was still liquid in -40-degree weather. "What the hell?" I muttered, looking around the camp again. I tried raising them on the radio. "Research Team Alpha, this is Ranger Red Hawk. Please respond." Static. "Anyone out there? This is an emergency check-in." More static. Then I heard it. Faint voices coming from the direction of the lake, carried on a wind that wasn't there. I couldn't make out words, but they sounded like people calling for help. I grabbed my emergency pack and headed toward the sound, following what looked like a trail through the trees. The path wound down a gentle slope toward the lake shore, and as I walked, I started to notice things that didn't make sense. The trees were wrong, not diseased or damaged, but wrong in a way I couldn't put my finger on. The bark looked too smooth, the branches hung at angles that hurt to look at, and there was a smell in the air, salt water and seaweed, like the ocean. But we were 400 miles from the nearest coast. The voices got louder as I reached the tree line. Definitely human voices, definitely calling for help. But when I broke through the trees and saw the lake, my blood went cold. The ice was wrong. It should have been white or clear, solid enough to drive a truck across. Instead, it was dark and smooth like a mirror, with patches that looked almost black. And there were holes in it, perfectly round holes that went down into water so dark I couldn't see the bottom. "Help us!" The voice was clearer now, coming from somewhere out on the lake. "Please, we're trapped." I could see shapes moving under the ice. Human shapes, swimming back and forth, like they were looking for a way out. My rational mind said it was impossible. People couldn't survive more than a few minutes in water that cold, and the ice was 3 feet thick. Nothing could break through from underneath. But there they were. I could see faces pressed against the underside of the ice, mouths open like they were screaming. I started toward the lake, then stopped. Something made me look down at the snow around my feet. There were tracks leading from the forest to the water's edge, human footprints and snow boots, just like the research team would have worn. But the tracks changed as they got closer to the water. The boot prints gradually became something else. Long, webbed prints with claw marks. Like a huge otter had been walking on its hind legs, then dropped down to all fours. The prints led right to one of those perfectly round holes in the ice. "This is crazy," I said out loud, backing away from the water. People don't just turn into animals. But the voices were still calling from under the ice, and I could see the shapes moving down there in the dark water. One of them swam close to the surface, and for just a second, I saw a face looking up at me through the ice. It was human, but not quite right. The eyes were too big, too dark. The mouth was open in a scream, but the teeth were pointed like a fish's teeth, and there was something growing on the sides of the neck that looked almost like gills. I ran back to my snowmobile and tried the radio again. "McKinley Station, this is Ranger Red Hawk. Emergency situation at Wonder Lake. I need immediate backup and a helicopter." The radio crackled to life, but instead of the dispatcher's voice, I heard my grandmother's voice speaking in Athabascan. Words I hadn't heard since I was a child, but somehow I understood them. "The water spirits are hungry, grandson. They have been waiting so long for fresh blood." I dropped the radio like it was on fire. My grandmother had been dead for 5 years. The temperature was dropping fast, and my breath was coming out in thick clouds. But worse than the cold was the feeling that I was being watched. I looked toward the lake and saw ripples spreading across one of the holes in the ice, like something big had just surfaced. Then I heard splashing. In water that should have been frozen solid, something was swimming, something big enough to make waves. I started my snowmobile and got the hell out of there. But as I drove back toward the research camp, I could hear voices behind me. Human voices, calling my name. Tom Redhawk, don't leave us here." I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Because I was starting to remember more of my grandmother's stories, and I was beginning to understand that some legends are warnings. I made it back to the research camp as the last bit of daylight faded from the sky. February in Alaska only gives you about 4 hours of real light, and the rest is just different shades of darkness. My radio crackled to life. "Tom, you out there?" It was Jake Morrison, another ranger from the McKinley station. "Storm's breaking up. I'm heading your way with the dog team." Jake was good people, 10 years of experience, steady in a crisis, and one of the few guys who could handle a sled team in weather like this. If anyone could help me figure out what happened to the research team, it was him. "Jake, thank God. But listen, something weird is going on out here. The missing team. I found evidence they went into the lake." "But that's impossible." "What kind of evidence?" "Tracks leading to holes in the ice. And Jake, I saw them under the water, moving around like they were still alive." Silence on the radio. Then, "Tom, when's the last time you slept? You've been out there almost 24 hours. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was seeing things. But the warm coffee pot was real. The tracks were real. And I had photos on my camera to prove it. I spent the night in one of the research team's tents. But I didn't sleep much. Every few hours, I'd hear voices outside calling my name. Sometimes it was the missing researchers. Sometimes it was Jake, even though he hadn't arrived yet. And once, just before dawn, I heard my grandmother singing a lullaby she used to sing when I was scared. When morning came, Jake's dog team appeared through the trees, like something out of a Jack London story. 8 huskies pulling a sled loaded with emergency equipment, and Jake looking like a mountain man in his fur-lined parka. "Hell of a thing," he said, looking around the empty camp. "No bodies, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Where'd they go?" I showed him the tracks leading down to the lake. In the morning light, they were even clearer. Human prints that gradually changed into something else. Jake knelt down and studied them, his face getting more and more confused. "These aren't right," he said. "It's like someone was walking normal, then their feet started changing shape as they walked." We followed the tracks to the lake shore, and Jake stopped dead when he saw the water. "That ice should be solid," he said, 3 feet thick, minimum. "I've driven snowmobiles across this lake in March." But there it was, dark water visible through perfectly round holes, with shapes moving underneath. As we watched, a pale hand pressed against the ice from below, fingers spread wide like it was trying to break through. "Jesus Christ," Jake whispered. "There's someone down there." The hand moved along the underside of the ice, tapping out a pattern. 3 short taps, 3 long taps, 3 short taps. "That's SOS," I said. Jake was already stripping off his outer gear. "We have to get them out." "Jake, no. Something's not right about this." But he wasn't listening. He grabbed an ice axe from his sled and started toward the water. "If there's even a chance someone's alive down there." I tackled him before he reached the edge. We wrestled in the snow for a few seconds until I managed to pin him down. "Look at me," I shouted. "Use your head. How long can a person survive in water that cold? How are they swimming around down there like it's a swimming pool?" Jake stopped struggling. I could see the logic working through his mind, fighting against the desperate need to help. "Then what are they?" he asked. Before I could answer, something erupted from one of the holes in the ice. It was sleek and dark, about 8 feet long, moving like an otter but standing upright like a man. For just a second, it looked at us with eyes that were too intelligent, too human. Then it dove back under the water without a splash. "Did you see that?" Jake's voice was barely a whisper. I helped him to his feet. "Now do you believe me?" We backed away from the lake, but the thing surfaced again, this time closer to shore. In the clear morning light, I could see it better. It had the body of a giant otter, but its front paws looked like hands with webbed fingers, and when it opened its mouth, it spoke in a perfectly human voice. "Help us, Tom. We're so cold down here." It was the voice of Dr. Sarah Chen, the team leader from the university. I'd met her once at a safety briefing, but this thing in the water wasn't Sarah anymore. Jake raised his rifle, but the creature dove before he could get a shot off. The water in the hole went still, like a mirror reflecting the gray sky. "What the hell was that?" Jake asked. "Kushtaka," I said, remembering my grandmother's stories. "Shapeshifters. They steal people and turn them into creatures like themselves." "That's just native folklore, Tom. There has to be a rational explanation." But even as he said it, more shapes were moving under the ice. I counted at least 6 now, swimming back and forth like they were waiting for something. We set up a defensive camp on high ground, away from the water. Jake tried to radio for backup, but all he got was static, mixed with voices speaking in languages neither of us recognized. My GPS was showing our location as somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Our emergency beacon was transmitting a signal, but according to the readout, we were 300 feet underwater. Our equipment's been compromised somehow, Jake said. Everything's giving impossible readings. That's when we found the first body. It was floating just under the surface of the ice, perfectly preserved. Dr. Kevin Walsh, one of the graduate students. His eyes were open, staring up at us through the ice, and his mouth was moving like he was trying to talk. "He's alive," Jake breathed. But when I looked closer, I could see that Kevin wasn't quite right anymore. His skin had a gray, rubbery look to it. His fingers had grown longer, with webbing between them, and when he opened his mouth to speak, I could see rows of sharp teeth. "Come swimming," he mouthed through the ice. "The water's warm." Jake was already moving toward the ice with his axe. "We have to get him out." "That's not Kevin anymore," I said, grabbing his arm. "That's what they do. They keep the memories, the personality, but the body changes. They become something else." "You're talking crazy, Tom?" But as we watched, Kevin's body began to change shape under the ice. His arms and legs shortened, his torso became more streamlined, and fur began to sprout along his skin. In seconds, he had transformed from a human into a giant otter. The thing that had been Kevin swam away into the dark depths of the lake. "Oh God," Jake whispered. "Oh God, what is this place?" The sun was setting again, and the temperature was dropping fast. In the distance, I could hear splashing and voices calling our names. They knew we were here, and they were getting impatient. As darkness fell, Jake started to change. It started small, Jake complaining that his skin felt tight, scratching at his neck and wrists. I thought it was just the dry air and cold wind. But when I looked closer, I could see his skin had a different texture, almost scaly in places. "When did you touch the water?" I asked. "I didn't." "Well, maybe when I was kneeling by the edge, looking at the tracks. Some splashed up on my gloves. That was all it took. Just a few drops of lake water on exposed skin." By midnight, webbing had started to form between Jake's fingers. His eyes were getting darker, pupils dilating until there was barely any white left. And he kept talking about how warm the water looked, how good it would feel to just slip in for a quick swim. "Fight it, Jake. Remember who you are." "I'm fine, Tom. I feel great, actually. Better than I've felt in years." His voice was changing too, developing a strange echo like he was talking underwater. I tied him to a tree with climbing rope, but he didn't resist. Just sat there smiling and humming a tune that sounded like whale song. The creatures in the lake were getting bolder. I could see them moving under the ice, circling like sharks. Sometimes they would surface and call to us in the voices of people we knew. Jake's ex-wife asking him to come home. My old army buddies from Vietnam telling me they needed help, but the worst was when they used my grandmother's voice. "Tommy, don't fight this. Your people have always been connected to the water spirits. You belong with us." I knew it wasn't really her, but part of me wanted to believe it. Part of me was so tired of fighting, so tired of being alone in the wilderness, that the idea of joining something larger than myself seemed almost appealing. That's when I understood how they hunted. They didn't just use force. They used loneliness, desperation, the human need to belong to something. Around 3 a.m, Jake broke free from the ropes. His strength had increased with the transformation, and the webbing between his fingers had grown thick enough to slip through the knots. "The water's calling, Tom. Can't you hear it?" He was right. There was a sound coming from the lake now, low and musical, like singing. But it wasn't coming through the air. It was coming up through the ground, through the ice, vibrating in my bones. Jake started walking toward the lake, and I had to tackle him again. This time, he fought back. His fingernails had grown into claws, and his teeth were becoming pointed. When he spoke, I could see gills opening and closing on the sides of his neck. "Let me go, Tom. I need the water." "No, I'm not losing you too." That's when the lead Kushtaka showed itself. It rose from the largest hole in the ice like a nightmare from the deepest ocean. 12 feet long, with the sleek body of an otter but standing upright like a man. Its eyes were ancient and intelligent, and when it spoke, its voice was like the sound of waves on rocks. "Give us the half-blood," it said, looking directly at me. "His Athabascan heritage will make the transformation permanent. We need his bloodline to expand our territory." "Go to hell." The creature laughed, a sound like water gurgling down a drain. "Hell is for the living, Ranger. We offer something much better. eternal existence in the depths where the sun never burns and the ice never forms. More creatures were emerging from the water now. I counted at least 8 of them, and I recognized some of the faces. Dr. Sarah Chen was there, but transformed into something that was half woman, half otter. The other graduate students had become creatures that barely looked human anymore. But they still had memories, still had personalities. They called to me and Jake using inside jokes and personal details that only the real people would have known. "Tom," said the thing that had been Sarah, "remember when you gave that safety briefing about bear encounters? You were so serious, so professional. But you cared about keeping us safe." "Keep us safe now," added another voice. "Let us show you how to survive forever." Jake was getting weaker, the transformation accelerating. His skin had turned completely gray, and he was breathing through the gills in his neck as much as through his mouth. I made a decision that went against everything my rational mind believed. I reached into my pack and pulled out the small medicine bundle my grandmother had given me when I was 7 years old. Sage, sweetgrass, and a piece of turquoise wrapped in leather that had belonged to her grandmother. "Grandmother, if you can hear me, I need your help now." I lit the sage with my emergency lighter and began chanting words I hadn't spoken since childhood. Athabascan prayers of protection that my grandmother had taught me in secret, away from the missionaries who said they were devil worship. The Kushtaka recoiled from the smoke like it was acid. The lead creature let out a shriek that shattered the ice for 50 yards in every direction. "Old magic," it hissed. "But you are only half-blood. Your power is weak." It was right. The sage burned out quickly in the wind, and the creatures were already advancing again. But Jake had stopped changing. The transformation had halted, leaving him caught somewhere between human and otter. "Tom," he gasped through his new gills, "I can still think, still remember, but I want the water so bad it hurts." That's when I saw our only chance. The creatures were afraid of the sacred smoke, but I didn't have enough sage to keep them away for long. But there was something else my grandmother had taught me. "Fire on the water," I whispered, remembering her stories. "The old spirits fear fire on their water." I grabbed the emergency flare gun from my pack and fired it directly into the largest hole in the ice. The flare hit the water and kept burning, turning the lake surface into a pool of red flame. The Kushtaka screamed in unison, a sound like dying whales. They dove beneath the flames, but the burning chemicals spread across the water, following them down into their domain. "The underground cave," Jake said, his voice clearer now that the creatures were distracted. "There's an air-filled cave system under the lake. That's where they keep their victims during the transformation." "How do you know that?" "I can feel it. Part of me knows their thoughts now." The flare was burning out, and the creatures would surface again soon. I had maybe 5 minutes to end this. I looked at the remaining emergency supplies. 3 more flares, a small bottle of camping fuel, and Jake's knowledge of the cave system. "Can you lead me there?" Jake nodded, but I could see the effort it took for him to resist the call of the water. "But Tom, if we go down there, we might not come back up. Then, we better make sure we take them with us." The underwater cave was like nothing I'd ever seen. Glowing walls covered in some kind of phosphorescent moss, air pockets that allowed breathing, and water warm enough that we didn't freeze instantly when we dove through the burning lake surface. Jake could hold his breath far longer than any normal human, thanks to his partial transformation. He led me through underwater passages to a central chamber where the Kushtaka had been keeping their victims. I found the 1932 expedition team, still alive, still conscious, but so transformed they barely looked human anymore. They'd been down there for 50 years, serving as breeding stock for new Kushtaka. When they saw me, they begged me to kill them. I used the last of my flares and camping fuel to collapse the cave system. The explosion could be felt for miles, cracking the ice across the entire lake and sending a pillar of steam into the winter sky. Most of the Kushtaka died in the cave-in. The lead creature escaped, but it was badly injured. As Jake and I swam to the surface, I could hear its final words echoing through the water. "This territory is claimed. We will return when the ice reforms." We barely made it out alive. The helicopter rescue team found us hypothermic and delirious on the lakeshore 12 hours later. Jake's transformation had been stopped by the destruction of the cave, but he was permanently changed. His eyes stayed dark, and he could hold his breath for 20 minutes. He transferred to Florida the next month. The federal agents arrived before we even reached the hospital. Everything was classified, all evidence confiscated. The official report listed it as a tragic ice climbing accident with hypothermia-induced hallucinations. The 2 research students we saved from the cave had their memories suppressed with experimental drugs. They remember camping by a lake and waking up in a hospital, nothing else. Wonder Lake was permanently closed to the public. If you check the park maps today, you'll see it marked as restricted area, environmental research only. But there's no research happening there, just monitoring equipment and motion sensors. I took early retirement and moved to New Mexico. The cold bothers me now in ways it never did before. But every winter, I get calls from park rangers in Alaska reporting strange incidents at remote lakes. Missing persons whose tracks lead to the water's edge. Equipment malfunctions. Voices calling from under the ice. The Kushtaka are spreading. Climate change is opening new waterways, giving them access to territory they couldn't reach before. And they're learning to adapt to our modern world. Some of the recent disappearances involve cell phone signals coming from underwater, GPS coordinates that show impossible depths. I married a woman from my grandmother's tribe and learned to speak Athabaskan fluently again. The tribal elders say the old warnings are more important now than ever. The spirits that were contained by ice and isolation are being released as their world changes. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear Jake's voice calling me from dark water. Not the real Jake. He sends me Christmas cards from his job in the Everglades. But something, wearing his voice, using his memories to try to lure me back. My wife says I talk in my sleep, calling out warnings in Athabaskan. She keeps sage burning in our bedroom and won't let me go swimming alone. If you ever visit Alaska's remote lakes, remember this. The native warnings exist for a reason. If the locals won't go near the water, you shouldn't either. If the fish are gone and the ice feels too warm, leave immediately. And if you hear voices calling your name from under the ice, don't listen. No matter how familiar they sound, no matter how desperately they plead for help, they're not human anymore. They're something else, wearing human memories, and they're always hungry for fresh souls to join their endless hunt beneath the ice. The old spirits remember when the world belonged to them. They're patient enough to wait for us to come to them, one frozen lake at a time. My name is Thomas Ashwood, and I've been a ranger in these Virginia mountains for 13 years. I know every trail, every creek, every cave entrance in the George Washington National Forest like they were my own backyard. My daddy died in a coal mine when I was 16, crushed under 1,000 tons of rock, and I swore I'd never go underground again. But the mountains above ground? They became my home, my church, my whole world. People think being a ranger is all campfire safety talks and picking up trash. They don't know about the real work, the search and rescue calls that come in the middle of the night when some family's weekend camping trip turns into their worst nightmare. I've pulled bodies out of ravines, found lost hikers half dead from cold, tracked missing kids for days through brush so thick you can't see your own feet. I'm good at what I do. Maybe the best tracker in this part of Virginia. I can read sign like other folks read newspapers, a bent twig here, a scuff mark there. The way moss grows different where someone passed by. My partner Eddie always jokes that I can track a ghost through solid rock. October 1976 was shaping up to be a quiet month. The leaves were turning, tourists were thinning out, and we were settling in for the slow winter season. Then the call came in on a Tuesday morning, crackling through our radio like a bad dream. Missing persons, Devil's Backbone Ridge, family of 5, last seen Saturday. Devil's Backbone Ridge sits at 3,800 feet, 18 miles from the nearest road. It's beautiful country up there, all hardwood forest and limestone cliffs, with rock formations that look like sleeping giants. But it's also dangerous. The ridge gets its name from the way it curves like a giant spine, with steep drops on both sides and caves that run deeper than anyone's ever mapped. The Cherokee used to say that ridge was sacred ground, a place where the spirits of their ancestors watched over the valley below. Some of the old-timers in town still whisper stories about hollow folk, strange people who lived in the caves before the first white settlers came through. Just mountain talk, I always figured. Every place has its ghost stories. But as I loaded my gear that Tuesday morning, my pack with rope and flares, my .30-06 rifle, enough food for 3 days, I felt something I hadn't felt in all my years of ranging. a cold spot right between my shoulder blades, like someone was watching me from the tree line. Eddie met me at the trailhead, chewing tobacco and spitting into the dirt. He was 5 years older than me, graying at the temples, with hands tough as leather from 20 years of outdoor work. "What do we know?" I asked, checking my compass. "Family from Richmond," he said, pulling out his notebook. "The Hawkins. Mom, dad, 3 kids aged 8 to 16. They signed in at the ranger station Saturday morning, said they were planning to camp near the old Cherokee sites. Haven't been seen since. Equipment? Good stuff. Mountain hardware tent, proper sleeping bags, enough food for a week. These weren't city folks playing at camping. The dad's an Eagle Scout, leads a wilderness program for kids back home. That made it worse. Inexperienced campers, you expect them to get lost, make bad decisions. But when people who know what they're doing just vanish, it usually means something went seriously wrong. We hiked in under a gray sky that promised early snow. The trail wound up through thick forest, past waterfalls that would freeze solid in another month, past rock formations carved by wind and rain over millions of years. Everything looked normal, birds calling, squirrels chattering, the familiar sounds of an October forest. But the higher we climbed, the quieter it got. By noon, we'd covered 8 miles and found their first campsite. Everything was still there: tent, sleeping bags, cooking gear, laid out like they'd just stepped away for a morning hike. Coffee still in the pot, cold as mountain stone. "This doesn't make sense," Eddie said, kneeling by their fire ring. "Look at this." The ashes were 4 days cold, but arranged in a perfect spiral pattern. Not how ashes fall when a fire burns down natural. Someone or something had arranged them that way after the fire died. I took pictures, made notes, tried to think like a search and rescue professional instead of letting my imagination run wild. But as we searched the area around their camp, that cold feeling between my shoulders got stronger. There were no tracks leading away from the campsite. None at all. 5 people don't just disappear without leaving sign, not even if they were being extra careful. The ground was soft from recent rain, should have shown every footprint, every broken twig. "Maybe they moved camp," Eddie suggested. "Found a better spot." "Without their gear?" I pointed to the tent, still staked down tight. That's when we heard it for the first time. A sound like wind through a cave, but there was no wind. A low, hollow moan that seemed to come from the ridge itself, from somewhere deep underground. Eddie and I looked at each other. 28 years of combined ranger experience, and neither of us had ever heard anything like that. "Probably just air moving through the limestone," Eddie said, but his voice wasn't as steady as usual. "Probably," I agreed, but we both knew it wasn't. We spent the rest of Tuesday searching in expanding circles around the Hawkins campsite. Standard search and rescue protocols start where they were last seen, work outward in a grid pattern, mark every area covered. By evening, we'd covered 2 square miles and found nothing. No tracks, no dropped equipment, no sign that 5 people had ever walked through these woods at all. That night, we made camp a quarter mile from the abandoned site. I've slept outdoors thousands of nights, but something felt different up there on Devil's Backbone Ridge. The darkness was too thick, too quiet. No owl calls, no rustling in the underbrush, no night sounds at all. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of Eddie talking in his sleep. "Don't go down there," he was saying, his voice tight with fear. "Please don't go down there, they're waiting." I reached over and shook his shoulder. He sat up fast, breathing hard. "Bad dream?" I asked. "Cave," he said, wiping sweat from his face even though the temperature was maybe 30 degrees. "I dreamed I was in a cave, and there were things moving in the shadows. Things that weren't quite human. Just a dream, partner." But Eddie stared off toward the ridgeline, where limestone cliffs caught starlight like broken teeth. "Didn't feel like a dream," he whispered. Wednesday morning brought snow flurries and a helicopter from the state police. We radioed in our coordinates and guided them over the search area. But from the air, everything looked normal. Thick forest canopy, a few clearings, the rocky spine of the ridge itself. No bright colors of camping equipment, no smoke signals, no people waving for help. "Expand the search south toward Greer Creek," the pilot told us over radio. Maybe they decided to hike out that way. But I knew they hadn't. My gut told me they were still up here somewhere. On this ridge. The question was where. That's when we found the bones. Eddie spotted them first, arranged in a neat circle around a flat boulder about 100 yards from the Cherokee burial sites. Animal bones, mostly deer, maybe some smaller creatures, but old, sun-bleached white. They'd been there for months, maybe years. Some kind of old hunting camp? Eddie suggested. Maybe. But I'd never seen hunters arrange bones in perfect circles. And there was something else, symbols carved into the boulder itself. Not Cherokee markings, which I'd seen before on other sites. These were different, older looking. Spirals and lines that seemed to twist your eyes if you stared at them too long. I took pictures, made sketches in my notebook. The symbols reminded me of something, but I couldn't place what. That afternoon, we found the cave. It was hidden behind a screen of mountain laurel. Just a dark crack in the limestone that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. But there were signs: broken branches, disturbed ground, and that sweet, sick smell of decay drifting out from the darkness. Could be a bear den, Eddie said, but he didn't sound convinced. I got down on my hands and knees, shined my flashlight into the opening. The beam didn't reach far before the darkness swallowed it up, but I could see that it opened up inside, like the entrance to something much bigger. And there, just at the edge of my flashlight beam, something glinted in the dark. "There's something in there," I said. Eddie leaned down beside me. "What kind of something?" I crawled forward, just my head and shoulders inside the cave entrance. The smell got stronger, not just decay, but something else underneath it. Something that made my stomach turn. The glinting object was a compass, a good one, the kind experienced hikers carry. And beside it, barely visible in the flashlight beam, was a child's red jacket. "Eddie," I called back, "get on the radio, call for backup and cave rescue equipment." "What did you find?" "I think I found the Hawkins family." But as I started to back out of the cave entrance, I heard something that made my blood freeze. From somewhere deep in the darkness, so faint I almost missed it, came the sound of a child crying, a living child. "There's someone down there," I told Eddie. "Someone's still alive." Cave rescue protocol says you never go into an unexplored cave system without proper equipment and backup. You wait for the specialists, the guys with the ropes and oxygen tanks, and experience with underground rescue. Going in unprepared is a good way to become a victim yourself. But that crying sound changed everything. "I'm going in," I said, checking my gear. "Just to the first chamber, see what we're dealing with." "Tom, that's not—" "There's a kid down there, Eddie, maybe dying. We can't wait 4 hours for a rescue team." Eddie grabbed my arm. "Then we both go." But I shook my head. "Someone needs to stay up here, maintain radio contact, guide the rescue team when they arrive. That's you." "I don't like this." "Neither do I. But that crying isn't going to wait." I tied 50 feet of climbing rope around my waist and gave Eddie the other end. My flashlight was good for maybe 6 hours of steady use. I had emergency flares in my pack, a first aid kit, and my .30-06 rifle. "If something happens," I told Eddie, "if you don't hear from me in 1 hour, call for more help and do not come after me." "What if?" 1 hour, Eddie, no matter what. The cave entrance was tight, but it opened up after maybe 10 feet. I found myself in a limestone chamber the size of my living room, with passages leading off in 3 directions. The air was cold and damp, with that sick sweet smell stronger than ever. And there, huddled against the far wall, was 8-year-old Sarah Hawkins. She was alive, conscious, but something was wrong with her. Her eyes were wide and staring, and when I called her name, she didn't respond. Just kept making that soft crying sound, like a hurt animal. "Sarah, honey, I'm a ranger. I'm here to help you." I moved toward her slowly, flashlight beam steady. She was wearing the red jacket I'd seen near the entrance, but it was torn and dirty. She'd been down here for days, but somehow she wasn't dead from cold or dehydration. "Where are your parents, Sarah? Where's your family?" That's when she spoke, but not in English. The words that came out of her mouth were in a language I'd never heard before, old-sounding, like stones grinding together. And behind me, from one of the other passages, came an answering call in the same language. Something was down there in the dark, something that spoke to lost little girls in languages that shouldn't exist. I scooped Sarah up in my arms. She weighed almost nothing, like she was made of shadows, and started back toward the entrance as fast as I could move. The crying sound behind us got louder. Not like a child anymore. Like something pretending to be a child, but not getting it quite right. 30 seconds later, I was pushing Sarah up through the cave entrance into Eddie's arms, and scrambling out after her like the devil himself was on my heels. Maybe he was. Sarah Hawkins didn't speak English for 3 days. The rescue helicopter took her to the hospital in Charlottesville, where doctors found her physically unharmed but mentally traumatized beyond anything they'd seen. She spoke only in that strange, grinding language, and when anyone asked about her family, she would point down at the floor and make sounds like rocks falling. Eddie and I guided the cave rescue team back to the site Wednesday evening. 6 specialists with full gear, ropes, oxygen, underground communication equipment, lights powerful enough to turn night into day. "How far back does it go?" asked their team leader, a guy named Morrison, who'd been pulling people out of caves for 15 years. "I only made it to the first chamber," I told him, "but there are multiple passages leading deeper." "And Morrison? There's something else down there, something that called back when the girl spoke." Morrison gave me a look like maybe I'd been underground too long. "Called back how?" "In the same language she was speaking. A language that doesn't exist." "Tom," Eddie said quietly, "maybe you should sit this one out. You've been through enough." But I shook my head. "I know that cave now. And if there are more survivors down there, or more bodies," Morrison added grimly. The cave rescue went bad from the start. Morrison and his team got maybe 100 feet into the cave system before their equipment started malfunctioning. Radios filled with static, lights dimmed for no reason, and the rope they were using to mark their path back kept getting tangled on things that weren't there. "It's like the cave doesn't want us inside," Morrison radioed back to Eddie and me. "The air currents are all wrong. Passages that should go straight seem to curve back on themselves." An hour in, they found the first body. Robert Hawkins, the father, was discovered in a side chamber about 200 feet from the entrance. He'd been dead for days, but the weird thing was how peaceful he looked. No signs of struggle, no obvious injuries. Just lying there like he'd decided to take a nap and never woke up. "Exposure?" I asked when Morrison's team brought him out. "Maybe. But look at this." Morrison showed me Robert's hands. The fingernails were gone, worn down to nothing, and his fingertips were scraped raw, like he'd been trying to claw his way through solid rock. "Trying to dig deeper into the cave?" Eddie asked. "Or trying to get out," Morrison said. "Hard to tell." They found the mother an hour later, deeper in the system. Margaret Hawkins was in the same condition, peaceful expression, fingertips clawed raw, no obvious cause of death. But she was found in a passage that dead-ended after 50 feet. No way deeper, no way out except back the way she came. "So how'd she get past us?" Morrison asked. "We cleared every passage between here and the entrance." That was when things got really strange. Eddie was monitoring radio communications from our surface base camp when Morrison's voice came through, calm and professional as always. "Base camp, this is Morrison. We've found another chamber, really big one. Must be the main gathering area. There's evidence of long-term habitation down here." "And base camp? We've found the rest of the family." "Alive?" Eddie asked into his radio. "Negative. But Tom needs to see this. Tell him to come down. Bring his camera." Eddie looked at me. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do. But when I rappelled down into that cave system for the second time, following Morrison's rope markers through passages that seemed to twist and bend in ways that hurt my brain, I couldn't find his team anywhere. Their equipment was there, lights, ropes, communications gear, all set up like they'd just stepped away for a minute. But no people. And when I tried their radio frequency, all I got was static. I followed their rope deeper into the system, through chambers that opened up like underground cathedrals, past limestone formations that looked almost like furniture if you squinted in the dim light. The air got colder the deeper I went, and that sweet decay smell got stronger. That's when I found the paintings. They covered the walls of a chamber the size of a school gymnasium, painted in colors that seemed to glow with their own light. But these weren't Cherokee pictographs or settler graffiti. These were old, ancient, and they told a story. The paintings showed tall, thin figures with 2 long arms and fingers like claws. They were hunting shorter figures, human figures, through cave systems that stretched down into the earth like a spider web. In some scenes, the tall figures were feeding on the humans. In others, they were doing something worse, changing them, making them into something else. At the bottom of the paintings, in symbols that matched the ones I'd seen carved on the boulder above ground, was what looked like a date. But not any kind of dating system I recognized. I took pictures of everything, my camera flash throwing crazy shadows on the cave walls. But when I looked at the photos later, they all came out wrong. Blurred, like something had been moving in front of the lens too fast to see. That's when I heard Morrison's voice again, coming from somewhere deeper in the cave system. Tom, you need to see this. Follow the rope to the big chamber. There's something incredible down here. But Morrison's voice sounded wrong. Too calm, too friendly. Like someone doing an impression of Morrison but not getting it quite right. I keyed my radio. Morrison, this is Tom. What's your position? Just follow the rope, Tom. Trust me. You've never seen anything like this. But the rope ended 20 feet from where I stood, cut clean through. And Morrison's voice was coming from a passage that sloped down into darkness so thick my flashlight couldn't penetrate it. Morrison, I called out loud. If that's really you, tell me the name of the creek we searched yesterday. Silence for a long moment. Then, just come down, Tom. They're waiting for you. They've been waiting for so long. That wasn't Morrison talking. Morrison would have known it was Greer Creek. I turned around and started back toward the surface, moving faster than was smart in an unexplored cave system. Behind me, that voice that sounded like Morrison but wasn't Morrison kept calling, getting fainter as I climbed. Don't leave, Tom. Don't leave us down here with them. Please, Tom. They're hungry. I made it to the surface just as full dark hit the ridge. Eddie was pacing around our base camp, radio in hand, looking scared. Thank God, he said when I emerged from the cave. I lost contact with Morrison's team 2 hours ago. Radio just went dead. They're gone. Eddie. What do you mean gone? I mean they're not down there anymore. At least, not the way they went in. I told him about the empty equipment, the cut rope, the voice that sounded like Morrison but wasn't. Eddie listened without interrupting. But I could see the disbelief in his eyes. Tom, you've been under a lot of stress, maybe. Eddie, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. Something is living in that cave system, something that's been there for a long time, and it's not done hunting. That night, we took shifts, standing watch. Neither of us slept much anyway. Around 3 a.m, during Eddie's watch, he shook me awake. Tom, look. I sat up and followed his pointing finger toward the cave entrance, maybe 100 yards from our camp. There were lights moving down there, not flashlights or campfires, something else, something that pulsed and shifted like it was alive. And in that strange light, I could see shapes moving around the cave entrance. Tall shapes, too tall to be human. How many are there? I whispered. I've counted at least 6. Maybe more. We watched for an hour as the shapes moved back and forth across the cave entrance, like they were searching for something, or waiting for something. When dawn came, they were gone. But carved into the dirt around our campsite were symbols. The same spiral patterns I'd seen on the boulder, on the cave walls, like they'd been walking circles around us all night, close enough to touch our tent, close enough to kill us, if they'd wanted to. Thursday morning, Eddie and I hiked down to the ranger station to call for help. State police, FBI, anyone who would listen. But when we tried to tell them about Morrison's missing team, about the shapes in the night, about cave paintings that were older than human civilization, we got looks like we'd lost our minds. Heat exhaustion, the state police captain told us. Stress-induced hallucinations, happens to search and rescue personnel all the time. What about the missing cave rescue team? I asked. What team? We have no record of sending any cave specialists to your location. Eddie and I stared at each other. Morrison and his team had been real. They'd had proper equipment, credentials, years of experience. But according to official records, they'd never existed. The girl, Eddie said, Sarah Hawkins, she'll back up our story. But when we called the hospital in Charlottesville, they told us Sarah had been discharged 2 days ago, released to her grandparents, who'd driven her home to Richmond. There was no record of any strange language, any traumatic symptoms. She was fine when she left, the doctor told us. Quiet, but fine, said she didn't remember anything about being in a cave. Every piece of evidence was disappearing. The photos I'd taken in the cave came out as nothing but shadows and blur. The rope I'd used to rappel down had vanished from our equipment. Even the symbols carved around our campsite were gone, like they'd never been there. But I knew what I'd seen. Eddie knew too, though he was starting to doubt himself. Maybe we should just file our report and let someone else handle this, he said as we drove back up to Devil's Backbone Ridge. Handle what? According to everyone else, nothing happened up there. 5 people went camping, and 4 of them died of exposure. End of story. Then maybe that's what we should believe too. But I couldn't let it go. That night, I went back to the cave alone. I know that was stupid. Everything about search and rescue training says you never go into a dangerous situation without backup, but I needed answers. And I had a feeling those answers were waiting for me in the dark. The cave entrance looked different at night. Bigger somehow, like it was breathing. I tied my rope off to a solid tree, checked my flashlight batteries, and dropped down into the darkness. The first chamber was empty, but I could hear sounds coming from deeper in the system. Not the voice that had pretended to be Morrison. Something else. Shuffling footsteps, whispered conversations in that ancient language Sarah had spoken. I followed the main passage toward the painted chamber, moving as quietly as I could. But limestone echoes everything, and I knew whatever was down there could hear me coming. The painted chamber was lit up like Christmas morning. Not electric lights, but that same strange glow I'd seen from outside the cave. And standing in front of the ancient paintings were the people who'd been hunting me all week. They weren't human. Not anymore, if they ever had been. 9 feet tall, skinny as scarecrows, with arms that hung down past their knees and fingers that ended in black claws. Their skin was white as cave fungus, and their eyes were milky, like they'd been blind for centuries. But they moved like they could see everything. There were 6 of them, arranged in a circle around something on the ground. Something that looked like Morrison, but wrong. Too still, too pale, like all the life had been drained out of him. As I watched from the shadows at the chamber entrance, one of the tall figures knelt down and placed its clawed hand on Morrison's forehead. Morrison's eyes opened, not normal eyes, but milky white like theirs. And when he spoke, it was in that grinding, ancient language. They were changing him, making him into something like them. That's when I understood. This is what had happened to the Cherokee who disappeared from these mountains centuries ago. What had happened to the early settlers. What was happening now to anyone who came too close to their feeding grounds. The Hollow Folk weren't just killing people, they were recruiting them. One of the creatures raised its head and looked directly at where I was hiding. Not blind after all. When it spoke, its voice sounded like wind through a graveyard. "Thomas Ashwood, we've been waiting for you." I raised my rifle, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely aim. "Stay back, I'm warning you. You belong here, Thomas. You've always belonged here. Your father knew. My father died in a coal mine. Your father found our southern chambers. He brought us gifts, fresh meat from the surface." That's not true. But as it spoke, memories started coming back. Memories I'd buried so deep I'd forgotten they existed. My father disappearing for days at a time when I was little, coming back with a haunted look in his eyes. Strange sounds in our basement at night. The smell of decay that seemed to follow him wherever he went. He promised us his son when the time was right. We've been patient, Thomas. But our hunger grows. The creature started moving toward me, and the others followed. In the strange light, I could see they cast no shadows, like they weren't quite solid, weren't quite real. I fired my rifle. The bullet passed right through the lead creature without slowing it down. Iron cannot harm us here, in our place of power, but we can harm you. One of them reached out with those long claws and raked them across my arm. Pain exploded through my shoulder, and I felt blood soaking through my jacket. These things were solid enough when they wanted to be. Choose. Thomas Ashwood. Join us willingly, and we will make your transformation gentle. Fight us, and we will make you suffer as your father suffered. My father fought you? He tried, but in the end, he brought us what we wanted. He brought us you. I backed toward the chamber entrance, rifle useless in my hands. But something caught my eye. Carved into the cave wall next to the ancient paintings were newer symbols. Not the spiral patterns of the Hollow Folk, but Cherokee protective markings. Someone had carved them there recently, maybe within the last few decades. And I remembered something Old Man Whitefeather had told me years ago, back when I was first starting as a ranger. Cherokee warriors had fought things in these caves, things that weren't quite human. They'd developed ceremonies, protective rituals, ways to keep the Hollow Folk contained. Iron might not hurt them, but there were other ways. I pulled out my emergency flare and struck it against the chamber wall. Red light exploded through the cavern, and the creatures recoiled like they'd been hit with acid. "Light," I whispered. They can't stand light. I lit another flare, then another. The hollow folk pressed back against the far wall, making sounds like steam escaping from underground vents. This changes nothing, Thomas Ashwood. We will wait. We have waited centuries. We will wait centuries more. Maybe. But you'll wait hungry. I kept the flares between me and them as I backed out of the chamber, then ran for the surface like my life depended on it. Because it did. Behind me, those ancient voices rose in anger, echoing through the cave system like the sound of the world ending. But I made it out alive. Eddie was waiting for me at the surface with a bulldozer and 20 tons of dynamite. Figured you might need help sealing this thing up permanent, he said, when I came stumbling out of the cave entrance with my clothes torn and bloody. How did you? Called Old Man Whitefeather. Told him about the symbols, the paintings, everything. He said his grandfather used to tell stories about the hollow folk. Said there were ways to keep them locked up. But it took more than just blocking the entrance. We spent the next 6 hours setting charges throughout the cave system, guided by Cherokee ceremonies that were older than written history. Whitefeather himself came up to the ridge, a 90-year-old Cherokee elder who moved through the forest like smoke. My people fought these things for generations, he told us as we prepared the final charges. They were here before us, before anyone. But they can be contained. Trapped. Made to sleep. For how long? Long enough. The explosion brought down half the ridge face. Tons of limestone and shale sealed the cave entrance, and the Cherokee protection symbols we'd carved into the rocks above should keep it that way. But 3 months later, I got a call from a ranger in West Virginia. They'd found some caves near Harper's Ferry with strange paintings inside, ancient symbols, evidence of long-term habitation by something that wasn't quite human. And missing hikers. Always missing hikers. I still work these mountains, but I carry different equipment now. Not just my rifle and rope, but flares and Cherokee blessing stones and knowledge that I wish I didn't have. Sometimes I catch sight of Old Man Whitefeather watching me from the tree line, making sure I remember the lessons we learned up on Devil's Backbone Ridge. The official report said the Hawkins family died of exposure, their bodies lost in a cave-in caused by unstable geological conditions. Morrison's team never officially existed, so they couldn't officially disappear. Sarah Hawkins grew up normal, went to college, got married, had kids of her own, but sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I can hear voices calling from underground. Ancient voices, hungry voices, patient voices that remember when the world was young and humans were just another kind of prey. The hollow folk are still down there, in caves throughout Appalachia. Still waiting, still hunting, still patient. And if you're planning to go cave exploring in these mountains, I've got one piece of advice for you. Stay out of any cave marked with spiral symbols carved into the rock above the entrance. Those symbols aren't decorations, they're warnings. And some warnings you'd better heed. My name is Thomas Ashwood, and I've been keeping watch over these mountains for 16 years now. 3 years longer than I planned, but some jobs don't end when your shift is over. Some jobs follow you home. My name is Elena Blackwater, but everyone calls me Lena. I'm a park ranger at Katmai National Park in Alaska, and I need to tell you what really happened here in September of 1986. What I'm about to share might sound impossible, but I swear on my grandmother's grave that every word is true. I've been working these waters for 8 years now. Before that, I studied marine biology at Stanford University. I believed in science, in facts you could measure and prove. Evolution, natural selection, the food chain. These were the rules that made sense of the world. My grandmother used to tell me old Aleut stories about spirits in the water, but I thought they were just fairy tales. I should have listened to her. Katmai sits right in the heart of Alaska's wild country. My station is near Brooks Falls, where the brown bears come to catch salmon every year. It's beautiful but dangerous country. The nearest town is a 12-hour boat ride away, and that's only if the weather's good. Most of the time, I'm alone out here with just my radio and my research equipment. The park sits on top of active volcanoes. You can smell the sulfur in the air, and steam rises from the ground in places. In 1912, one of the biggest volcano eruptions in history happened here. It was so powerful that ash fell as far away as Seattle. The explosion changed everything: rivers, valleys, even where the salmon swim. My job is to study the fish populations and keep track of the brown bears. I carry a tranquilizer gun, bear spray, and all the usual ranger gear. I speak 3 languages: English, Russian, and Aleut, which helps when I meet the native elders. They still come here to fish, following paths their ancestors walked for thousands of years. It was the middle of September when everything started. The salmon were running thick that year, silver bodies jumping up the falls like living rain. The bears should have been fat and happy, getting ready for winter sleep. Instead, they seemed nervous, skittish. They'd catch a fish, take one bite, then drop it and walk away. I should have paid more attention to that. The weather had been strange too. Fog kept rolling in from Shelikof Strait, thick and black like nothing I'd ever seen. It smelled wrong, not like ocean fog, but like something from deep underwater trenches where no light ever reaches. The fog would form perfect circles around my research station, then disappear just as suddenly. That's when the Coast Guard called about the missing fishing boat. "We've got a situation, Ranger Blackwater." The voice crackled over my radio. "Commercial fishing vessel Northern Promise missed their check-in. Last contact reported unusual marine mammal activity in your area." I grabbed my gear and headed out in my boat. The Northern Promise was a good-sized vessel with a crew of 6 experienced fishermen. These weren't weekend tourists. They knew these waters like their own backyard. I found their boat 3 hours later, anchored in calm water near the mouth of Brooks River. The engines were still running, all the lights were on, but there was nobody aboard. That wasn't the worst part. The deck was covered in blood. Not just drops or splashes, but pools of it that hadn't even dried yet. It was like someone had butchered a whale right there on the deck, but there were no bodies. All the life jackets were missing, but the emergency flare gun was still in its case, unfired. The strangest thing was the damage to the hull. Long gouges ran along both sides of the boat, like claw marks. But these marks were huge, 8 inches long and carved deep into the steel. I've seen what bear claws can do, and this wasn't it. These marks were made by something much, much bigger. I called it in to the Coast Guard, but the radio kept picking up interference. Instead of voices, I heard whale songs, the deep, echoing calls that humpbacks make. But there shouldn't have been any whales in these shallow waters. And the songs seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, even from the land. By the time I got back to my station, the sun was setting. I should have felt safer on solid ground, but I didn't. The fog was rolling in again, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear splashing. Big splashing, like something enormous moving through the water. I locked my doors that night and kept my tranquilizer gun close. For the first time in 8 years of working alone in the Alaska wilderness, I was truly afraid. The next morning brought no relief. I woke to silence, not the good kind of quiet you get in nature, but the wrong kind. No birds singing, no bears grunting as they fished. Even the river seemed muted, flowing over the rocks without its usual rushing sound. I radioed the Coast Guard for an update on the missing crew. "Still searching," came the reply. "But we've got a problem, Ranger Blackwater. Weather's turning nasty. Might be 48 hours before we can get a cutter to your position." 48 hours. In good weather, that would be fine. But looking at the black clouds building over the water, I knew this storm would be different. I decided to investigate the fishing boat again, this time bringing my underwater camera and water testing kit. If something in the water had attacked the crew, maybe I could find traces of it. The Northern Promise was exactly as I'd left it, engines still running, decks still stained red. But now I noticed details I'd missed before. The fishing nets were deployed but empty, not just of fish, but of everything. No seaweed, no debris, nothing. It was like every living thing in the water had fled. I put on my diving gear and slipped into the water beneath the boat. The visibility was terrible, but I could see massive displacement patterns in the sandy bottom. Something huge had thrashed around down there. The impressions looked almost like tracks. But that was impossible. Marine animals don't leave tracks underwater like land animals do. That's when my sonar started acting up. Instead of showing the familiar rocky bottom, it was detecting something large moving beneath me, 40 feet long, maybe bigger, swimming in slow circles directly under the boat. I surfaced fast, my heart hammering. Whales don't swim in 20 feet of water. Neither do any other marine animals that size. But the sonar doesn't lie. Back on the boat, I noticed something else. The blood wasn't just from humans. My field testing kit revealed 2 different types: human blood mixed with something else. Something with different proteins, different cell structures. Like it came from a marine mammal, but not any species I recognized. The radio crackled to life. "Ranger Blackwater, this is Dr. Marcus Webb. I'm a marine mammal specialist with NOAA. Flying in to assist with the investigation." I felt a wave of relief. Dr. Webb had been studying Alaska's marine life for 20 years. If anyone could explain what happened here, it would be him. His seaplane landed just as the fog started rolling in again. Webb was a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He brought specialized equipment, hydrophones to listen for marine mammal calls, cameras that could work in murky water, and sensors I'd never seen before. "Show me everything," he said, as we headed out to the fishing boat. I showed him the blood, the claw marks, the sonar readings. Webb's face grew more troubled with each piece of evidence. When I played him the whale songs my radio had picked up, he went completely pale. "That's not a whale," he said quietly. "Those are vocalizations from something much larger, and much more intelligent than any whale I know." That's when we heard the splash. Both of us turned toward the sound. About 100 yards away, something had disturbed the water. Not a small splash like a jumping salmon, but a massive displacement like a school bus had been dropped into the river. Webb grabbed his camera and pointed it toward the disturbance. Through the telephoto lens, we could see ripples spreading outward in perfect circles. And there, just beneath the surface, a dark shadow the size of a city bus. "Dear God," Webb whispered. "What is that thing?" The shadow moved with purpose, cutting through the water toward us. As it got closer, I could make out details that made no sense. It had the sleek shape of a whale, but with appendages that looked almost like limbs, arms, legs, things that no marine animal should have. "We need to leave." "Now," Webb said, but his voice was shaking. The creature surfaced just 50 feet from our boat. I've seen orcas before, many times. This looked like an orca, but wrong. Impossibly wrong. It was bigger, maybe 50 feet long, with markings that shifted and moved like living shadows. But the worst part was its eyes. They were intelligent, ancient, and they were looking right at us. As we watched, frozen in terror, the creature opened its mouth. Rows of teeth like railroad spikes gleamed in the gray light, and from deep in its throat came a sound I'll never forget, a whale song, but mixed with something else. Something that sounded almost like humans screaming. Webb was frantically taking pictures, his camera clicking like a machine gun. "This is impossible," he kept muttering. "Marine mammals can't survive in fresh water like this. The salinity, the depth, the temperature, it's all wrong." The creature sank beneath the surface as suddenly as it had appeared. The water closed over it without a trace, leaving us alone in the silence. We didn't speak on the ride back to my station. What was there to say? Everything we knew about marine biology, about the natural world, had just been turned upside down. This wasn't just a new species, it was something that shouldn't exist at all. That night, as Webb set up his monitoring equipment, I called my grandmother's sister on the radio. She's 90 years old and lives in the village. I asked her about the old stories, the ones my grandmother used to tell. "Aklut," she said simply. "The hunter from the deep. When the salmon run thick and the earth shakes, it wakes up. Your grandmother tried to warn you, child. Why didn't you listen?" The line went dead. And outside my window, I could hear something large moving through the water, circling my station like a shark around a wounded seal. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Webb. We took turns watching the water through night vision scopes, documenting every splash, every ripple. The creature, whatever it was, stayed close to the station. We could hear it moving out there in the dark, sometimes making those terrible whale screaming sounds, sometimes just the splash of something massive displacing water. "I've been studying marine mammals for 20 years, Webb said as we watched the sun rise over water that looked black as oil. "I've never seen anything like this. It's like it's studying us back." That's when we found the survivor. I spotted him floating about a quarter-mile downstream, wearing a bright orange life jacket from the Northern Promise. Webb and I took the boat out to pull him from the water. The man was alive but unconscious, his skin blue-gray from cold. His name tag read Jimmy Torres, first mate. But Jimmy Torres shouldn't have been alive. The water temperature was just above freezing. No human could survive a night in water that cold. Yet his body temperature was only 95 degrees, low, but not low enough to kill him. More disturbing were the changes to his body. His skin had a strange texture, almost scaly in places. His fingers and toes showed signs of webbing, and when he breathed, it sounded wet, like his lungs were partially filled with water. We got him back to the station and tried to warm him up, but he kept fighting us. Every time we pulled him away from the window, he'd struggle to get back to it. He stared at the water with an expression of pure hunger, making soft clicking sounds deep in his throat. "Jimmy," I said, kneeling beside him, "what happened to your crew? Where are the others?" His head turned toward me, but his eyes were wrong. The pupils were larger than they should be, and they reflected light like an animal's. When he opened his mouth to speak, his voice came out as a series of clicks and whistles, the same sounds whales use to communicate. Webb was recording everything, his face pale with excitement and terror. "He's trying to communicate," Webb said, "but not in human language. Those are whale vocalizations. Somehow his brain has been changed." That afternoon, we got our first good look at the creature in daylight. It surfaced near the research station just as we were testing water samples. This time, we could see it clearly. It was massive, easily 50 feet long, with the basic shape of an orca, but wrong in every detail. Its flippers were too long and ended in what looked like clawed hands. Its tail was partially split, almost like legs. Most disturbing of all, its black and white pattern seemed to shift and move, making it hard to focus on. "It's beautiful," Webb whispered, and I realized with horror that he was right. Despite everything terrifying about the creature, there was something hypnotic about watching it move through the water. Something that made you want to get closer. Jimmy Torres began clicking excitedly, pressing himself against the window. The creature turned toward our station, and for a moment its eyes met mine through the glass. Intelligence burned in those eyes. Ancient, alien intelligence that had been watching and waiting for far longer than humans had existed in Alaska. Then it was gone, vanishing beneath the surface without a ripple. "We need to call this in," Webb said, but when he tried the radio, all we got was static. Our satellite phone was dead too. The emergency beacon wasn't working. Somehow, all our communication equipment had stopped functioning at the same time. "It's isolating us," I realized, "cutting us off from help." That's when the attacks on the station began. The first one came just after sunset. I was in the kitchen making coffee when the whole building shook. It felt like an earthquake, but earthquakes don't grab buildings and shake them from side to side. Through the window, I could see something massive moving in the water next to the dock. The creature was testing the station's foundation, seeing how much punishment it could take. Webb ran for his camera, but before he could get a shot, something hit the building again. This time, one of the support beams cracked. The station was built to withstand earthquakes and storms, but it wasn't designed to resist a direct attack from something the size of a freight train. "The boat!" Webb shouted. "We need to get to the boat." But as we ran toward the dock, a massive shape erupted from the water. The creature's head rose 30 feet into the air, water cascading off its sleek black skin. Its mouth opened to reveal teeth like white daggers, and from deep in its throat came that terrible sound, whale song mixed with human screaming. Webb stopped running. I turned to grab his arm, to pull him toward safety. But he was just standing there staring at the creature. His eyes had gone wide and empty, like Jimmy Torres. The clicking sounds were starting in his throat. "Marcus!" I screamed, but it was too late. The creature's head darted forward, faster than a striking snake. Its jaws closed around Webb with a crunch that I felt in my bones. Blood splashed across the dock, across my face, across everything. In less than a second, Dr. Marcus Webb was gone. I ran back to the station, but the door had been torn off its hinges. Inside, Jimmy Torres was standing at the broken window, still making those clicking sounds. When he saw me, he smiled, and I saw that his teeth had grown sharper, longer. "Sister," he said in a voice like grinding gravel, "come to the water, come feed the children." I grabbed my emergency pack and ran. Behind me, I could hear the creature smashing the research station to pieces, and Jimmy Torres laughing like a man who had found God in the depths of hell. The fog was rolling in again, black and thick as smoke. Somewhere in that fog, something enormous was hunting, and I was running out of places to hide. I remembered my grandmother's stories then, really remembered them for the first time. The Achlut, she had called it. The orca spirit that could walk on land. It hunted during the salmon runs, she said, and it was always hungry, always looking for new servants to join its pack. The stories weren't fairy tales. They were warnings. And I hadn't listened. I ran through the volcanic landscape, my emergency pack bouncing against my back as steam hissed from the ground around me. Behind me, I could hear the creature destroying what was left of the research station. Wood splintered and metal groaned as 50 feet of impossible predator tore through the building like it was made of paper. But worse than the destruction was the sound Jimmy Torres was making. He was singing, not human songs, but whale songs. His voice had changed, becoming deeper and more resonant like it was coming from underwater. Other voices joined his from somewhere in the fog. The rest of the fishing crew, I realized. They were all alive, all changed, all singing together in harmony that made my teeth ache. I found shelter in a cave formed by cooled lava flows, deep enough to hide me but with multiple exits in case I needed to run. My hands shook as I checked my equipment. Flashlight, flare gun, emergency radio, first aid kit, and wrapped in oiled cloth at the bottom of the pack, something my grandmother had given me years ago, a carved harpoon point made from whalebone, inscribed with symbols I'd never bothered to learn. The radio crackled to life. Static at first, then voices speaking in a language I hadn't heard since my grandmother died. Alut. Old Alut. The formal speech used for ceremonies and sacred stories. Elena Blackwater, the voices said, and somehow I understood every word. Granddaughter of Elizabeth Many Whales. You carry the old blood. You can hear us. Who are you? I whispered into the radio. The guardians, the watchers, the ones who kept the balance before your people forgot how to listen. The Achlut has awakened. It feeds to prepare for the long swim to new waters. Its young grow strong in the warm places beneath the earth. Young. The creature had offspring. How do I stop it? You cannot stop the sea or the storm. But you can choose the price. The Achlut remembers the old ways, the old agreements. Your grandmother's blood calls to it. It will listen to you, but only once. Choose carefully, granddaughter. The radio went silent. Outside my cave, I could hear splashing. Multiple sources. Moving through water that shouldn't exist this far from the river. The creature was using the volcanic vents, the underground water systems, to travel wherever it wanted. The entire landscape was its territory. I thought about Webb, about his camera and his scientific instruments. Even as he died, he'd been trying to understand, to document, to explain. His equipment was scattered around the destroyed station, but maybe some of it had survived. Maybe there were answers in his research. The fog was getting thicker, but I knew these volcanic fields better than any creature from the sea. I made my way back toward the station using paths marked by my grandmother years before she died. Steam vents guided my way like signposts, and the smell of sulfur told me which areas were safe and which might collapse. The research station was gone. Not damaged, gone. The creature had pulled it apart, board by board, and scattered the pieces across a quarter-mile of shoreline. But Webb's waterproof equipment case had survived, thrown clear of the destruction. Inside, I found his research notes and something else, a recording device that had been running during our encounter with the creature. Webb's voice crackled from the speaker. Day 3 of investigation. The entity displays characteristics consistent with Orcinus orca, but with impossible modifications. Preliminary analysis suggests, God help me, it's like evolution run backward. Or forward. Like something took a whale and made it into what whales were before they returned to the sea. The recording continued, with technical details, but one phrase caught my attention. Thermal imaging shows massive heat sources beneath the volcanic vents. Multiple large shapes, possibly a breeding colony. A breeding colony. The creature hadn't come here alone, it had brought its family. That's when I heard the clicking behind me. Jimmy Torres emerged from the fog, but he was barely human anymore. His skin had turned gray-black like whale hide, and his limbs had elongated into something between arms and flippers. When he opened his mouth, I could see rows of sharp teeth like the ones I'd seen in the creature's maw. Sister, he said, but his voice was different now. Layered, like multiple people speaking at once. Come see the new world. Come swim in the deep places where the earth breathes fire. The Auklut shows us wonders beyond imagining. Behind him, more shapes moved in the fog. The rest of the fishing crew, all transformed, all singing that terrible whale song. But they weren't threatening me. They were inviting me. The pain only lasts a moment, Jimmy continued. Then you understand everything. The songs of the deep water, the dreams of the earth, the hunger that connects all living things. I backed away from them, my hand closing around my grandmother's harpoon point. The bone was warm against my skin, and I could hear whispers in the old language. Instructions. Guidance. The fog parted, and the Auklut rose from the water behind its servants. In the gray light, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was magnificent and terrible. A creature from the dreams of the deep ocean, shaped like an orca, but built for hunting in places where physics bent to older rules. Its eyes found mine, and in their depths, I saw intelligence that predated human civilization. But I also saw hunger. Desperate, endless hunger. Your people broke the agreements. It spoke without moving its mouth, its voice echoing inside my skull. They took the fish, poisoned the water, forgot the old songs. But you remember. Your blood remembers. Help me feed my young, and when they are strong, I will take them to new waters. Your people can keep their poisoned shallows, and if I refuse, then they starve. And when they starve, they hunt. Your fishing boats, your coastal towns, your children playing in tide pools. We will take what we need. I looked at the transformed crew members, at Jimmy Torres with his whale song voice and his two knowing eyes. This was what cooperation looked like. This was the price of peace. There's another way, I said, pulling out the harpoon point. The bone was carved with symbols that seemed to move in the gray light. My grandmother taught me the old stories. The Auklut were guardians once, not hunters. They protected the balance between sea and land. What changed you? The creature's massive head tilted, considering. Around us, the transformed crew members had stopped singing. Hunger, it said finally. The deep waters grow empty, the ice melts, the young waters burn with poison. We adapted or died, we chose to adapt. I understood then. Climate change, pollution, overfishing, we had made monsters of the guardians. In trying to survive our changes to the world, they had become something else. Something that could no longer protect, only consume. The harpoon point was warm in my hand, almost hot. My grandmother's voice whispered in my memory. Every story has two endings, Elena. The one where the monster wins, and the one where it remembers what it used to be. I raised the carved bone between us. The Auklut's eyes followed the movement, and for the first time since I'd seen it, the creature looked uncertain. I offer the old bargain, I said in Alut, the words coming from some deep place in my memory. Guardian for guardian. Protector for protector. Return to the deep waters, and my people will remember the agreements. Break the bargain, and face the consequences of broken oaths. The Auklut's massive head swayed back and forth. Around us, the fog began to dissipate, and I could hear new sounds. Helicopter rotors in the distance, boat engines cutting through the water. Help was coming. You would bind us again? The creature asked. Chain us to the old roles when the world has changed beyond recognition? I would remind you who you used to be, I said. Before the hunger, before the fear. You were guardians of the balance. Help us restore it. The Auklut considered this. Behind it, I could see other shapes moving in the water, its offspring, waiting to learn whether they would be guardians or monsters. Finally, the creature nodded its massive head. The old bargain, but if your people break faith again, they won't, I said, hoping I was right. I'll make sure they remember. The Auklut sank beneath the water without another word. One by one, the transformed crew members followed, their new forms sliding into the dark water like they had never been human at all. Only Jimmy Torres remained, standing on the shore in his orange life jacket, looking confused and human and terribly cold. The Coast Guard helicopter found us 3 hours later. Jimmy Torres was rushed to the hospital in Anchorage with severe hypothermia and exposure. The official report listed the rest of the crew as lost at sea during unusual weather conditions. The destroyed research station was blamed on seismic activity related to volcanic instability. Webb's body was never found. I spent 2 weeks in debriefing sessions with federal investigators who asked the same questions over and over. What happened to Dr. Webb? What destroyed the research station? Where were the rest of the crew members? I told them exactly what happened. They didn't believe a word of it. The investigation was eventually classified. All of Webb's research was confiscated. The Northern Promise was towed away and scrapped. Brooks Falls was temporarily closed to commercial fishing, while environmental assessments were conducted. Jimmy Torres recovered from his hypothermia, but he never spoke about what happened during the 2 days he was missing. The doctors said he had no memory of the incident, which was common with severe trauma and exposure. But sometimes, late at night in the hospital, nurses reported hearing him make strange clicking sounds in his sleep. I resigned from the Park Service 3 months later. Now I work as a cultural liaison between the federal government and Alaska Native tribes. My job is to make sure that traditional ecological knowledge is included in environmental protection decisions. It's boring paperwork most of the time, but occasionally I get to sit in meetings where important people make decisions about Alaska's waters. And when they do, I make sure they listen to the old stories. The Aklut haven't been seen since that day in September. Commercial fishing has returned to normal in most areas. Tourist boats visit Brooks Falls again, and the brown bears catch salmon without fear. But things are different now. Native fishing guides report unusual whale songs coming from the deepest parts of Prince William Sound. Marine biologists have documented new pod behavior among orcas, hunting patterns that suggest unprecedented cooperation between groups that should be territorial enemies. Climate researchers studying Arctic ice melt have recorded subsonic vocalizations from beneath the ice that don't match any known species. And sometimes, on very quiet nights when the fog rolls in thick and black from the deep water, I hear the clicking sounds again. Not from Jimmy Torres this time. He moved to Arizona after his recovery, as far from the ocean as he could get. These sounds come from my radio, late at night when I'm monitoring the marine frequencies. They're whale songs, but I understand them now. They're reporting back. Watching, waiting. The old bargain holds, but it's fragile. Each new oil spill, each new development project, each fish stock that collapses tests the agreement a little further. The Aklut remember what it means to be guardians, but they also remember what it feels like to be hungry. So I do my job, I attend the meetings, I file the reports, I make sure that people in Washington and Anchorage and Seattle understand that Alaska's waters are older and more complex than our charts suggest. And late at night, when the fog rolls in and the whale songs echo through my radio, I check my emergency pack. The harpoon point is still there, still warm to the touch, still inscribed with symbols that seem to move in the lamplight. My grandmother tried to teach me the old ways, but I was too young and too educated to listen. Now I'm learning them the hard way, from experience instead of stories. The Aklut are still out there, still watching, still protecting the balance between sea and land, but they're also still hungry, still capable of becoming something else if we push them too far. Every night before I sleep, I say a prayer in Alit to spirits I once thought were myths. I ask them to keep the bargain, to remember who they used to be. And sometimes, if I listen very carefully to the sounds the fog makes when it rolls off the water, I think I hear them answering. If you ever find yourself fishing Alaska's waters, especially near volcanic regions where the earth breathes steam and the salmon run thick, remember this story. If the whales start singing from the land instead of the sea, if the fog forms perfect circles around your boat, if the bears abandon their fishing spots for no reason you can understand, leave immediately. Don't wait to see what's hunting in the deep water. Don't try to take pictures or record evidence. Just leave, and trust that some things are better left undisturbed. The guardians are still there, keeping the balance, but they're watching us too, making sure we keep our end of the bargain. And if we don't, well, even guardians have to eat. My name is David Strongbear, but everyone calls me Dave. I've been a park ranger at Glacier Bay in Alaska for 19 years now. That's a long time to spend watching ice and helping tourists who don't dress warm enough. I'm 42 years old, half Tlingit and half German. My grandfather taught me the old stories about the ice and water, but I always thought they were just tales to scare kids. I was a fisherman before I became a ranger. Lost my brother and dad in a boat accident back in '67. That's when I decided the land was safer than the sea. I was wrong about that. It was August 1986, and the summer tourist season was at its peak. I was stationed at Muir Inlet, about 25 miles from the main park office. It's one of the most beautiful and dangerous places you'll ever see. The glacier there is huge and angry, always dropping chunks of ice the size of houses into the dark water. The radio crackled to life just after breakfast. "Dave, we've got a problem," came the voice of Sarah from headquarters. "That photography team should have checked in yesterday. They're 36 hours overdue." I knew the team she meant. 3 professional photographers from National Geographic, all experienced with cold weather. They had the best gear money could buy, and enough emergency supplies for a week. "What's their last known position?" I asked, already reaching for my coat. "They radioed from near the glacier face 2 days ago, said they found some unusual ice formations worth photographing." I frowned. The glacier had been acting strange lately. Seals were avoiding their usual spots on the ice, and the waterbirds seemed nervous. Even my grandfather used to say the animals know things we don't. "I'll take the boat out and have a look," I said. "Weather's been foggy, but I can navigate those waters blindfolded." That was my first mistake. In 19 years of ranger work, I'd learned to trust my training and experience. I'd pulled dozens of people out of the water, treated hypothermia, and guided lost hikers back to safety. The cold didn't scare me anymore, but I'd never dealt with something that wasn't supposed to exist. The fog was thick as I took my patrol boat into Muir Inlet. The water was calm, which was unusual for this time of year. The glacier face loomed ahead of me like a wall of blue-white ice, groaning and creaking as it slowly moved toward the sea. I'd been out there for 2 hours when I found the first piece of equipment. It was a camera, floating perfectly on the surface. Expensive digital equipment that should have sunk like a rock. When I pulled it aboard, the camera was bone dry, even though it had clearly been in the salt water. That's when I noticed the ice. There were icebergs floating in patterns I'd never seen before. Perfect circles, straight lines, shapes that looked almost like symbols. Ice doesn't arrange itself that way. Ocean currents and wind push bergs around randomly, not into geometric patterns. I radioed back to headquarters. "Sarah, I found some of their equipment. Camera's intact, but something's not right out here." "What do you mean?" I looked around at the strange ice formations. The ice, it's not behaving normally. Static answered me for a long moment. Then Sarah's voice came back, but it sounded different, older. Speaking Tlingit. "Koshta ka ya nagudi," the voice said. Asterisk. "The land otter men are hunting." Asterisk. I dropped the radio. My grandfather had been dead for 10 years. I picked up the radio with shaking hands. "Sarah? Sarah, come in." Her normal voice came through clearly. "I'm here, Dave. What's your status? Did someone else use the radio?" "No, it's just me and Tom in the office." "Why?" I stared at the radio, then at the ice formations around me. The fog was getting thicker, and the temperature was dropping fast. My breath came out in white puffs, even though it had been 50 degrees when I left dock. "Never mind. I'm going to search the area where they were last seen." I guided the boat closer to the glacier face, weaving between the floating ice. The icebergs were definitely in wrong patterns. Some were stacked on top of each other in ways that defied physics. Others floated in perfect rows, like soldiers standing at attention. Then I saw the footprints. They were frozen into the surface of an iceberg about 30 feet away. Human prints, boots, clear as day. But the iceberg was in the middle of deep water, with no land or ice bridge to it. How had someone walked out there? I brought my boat as close as I could and grabbed my ice picks. The prints led across the iceberg's surface and disappeared at the far edge. But there was no water splash, no sign of someone jumping in. The tracks just stopped. A sound made me look up. Somewhere in the fog, someone was calling for help. A man's voice, weak and scared. "Hello," I shouted. "Where are you?" "Here," came the reply. "Help me." I followed the voice, navigating between ice floes. The fog was so thick now, I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The voice led me deeper into the inlet, toward areas where the ice was thicker and more dangerous. "Keep calling," I yelled. "I'm coming." "I'm in the ice," the voice called back. "I can't get out." That's when I found him. He was standing inside a clear iceberg, perfectly preserved, like something in a museum. The ice was solid all around him. but I could see him moving. His eyes tracked my boat as I approached. His mouth moved like he was trying to speak. This was impossible. No one could be alive inside solid ice. The cold would kill them in minutes. But there he was, moving, watching me. I grabbed my emergency gear and started chipping at the ice with my picks. The ice was harder than any I'd ever encountered. My picks barely scratched the surface. The man inside was one of the photographers. I recognized him from the permit photos. He was wearing all his cold weather gear, but his skin looked strange, pale, and almost see-through. As I worked, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The iceberg was moving, not drifting with the current. It was following my boat. When I moved to the left, it moved to the left. When I backed away, it came closer. Ice doesn't follow boats. Ice doesn't hunt. I radioed for backup, but all I got was static. The fog was interfering with the signal. Or something else was. The temperature kept dropping. Ice was starting to form on my boat's rails, even though the air was well above freezing. That's when I heard them singing. Voices in the fog, singing in Tlingit. Old songs, hunting songs that my grandfather had taught me when I was small. Songs about spirits that lived in the ice and water, spirits that took human form to hunt the living. I tried to start my boat's engine, but it wouldn't turn over. The battery was fine, the fuel was good, but something was keeping it from starting. Around me, more icebergs were moving through the water, all heading in my direction. Inside his ice prison, the photographer was gesturing frantically. He was pointing behind me, his face twisted in terror. I turned around and saw something rising from the water. It looked like a person at first, but wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its skin was the color of ice, and its eyes were black as the deep ocean. Water poured off it as it stood on the surface like it was solid ground. It looked at me and smiled, showing teeth like icicles. Then it dove back into the water and disappeared. My engine started immediately. I got the boat back to the dock as fast as I could, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The man in the ice. The thing standing on the water. My grandfather's voice on the radio. Ranger Lisa Crow was waiting for me at the dock. She was younger than me, only been with the Park Service for 5 years, but she knew ice rescue better than anyone. She took one look at my face and knew something was seriously wrong. "What happened out there?" she asked. I told her everything. The strange ice formations, the footprints, the man trapped inside the iceberg, the thing rising from the water. She listened without interrupting, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. "Dave," she said carefully, "hypothermia can cause hallucinations. You were out in below freezing temperatures for hours." "I know what I saw. Let's go back out together. I've got the rescue gear, and backup is coming from Juneau." But when we reached the area where I'd found the trapped photographer, there was nothing. No ice formations, no floating cameras, no icebergs arranged in patterns, just normal chunks of glacier ice drifting in the current. "Maybe the tide moved everything," Lisa said, but she sounded uncertain. We spent the rest of the day searching, but found no trace of the 3 photographers. As evening approached, the fog rolled in again, thicker than before. The water turned perfectly calm, like glass. That's when we found the second one. He was standing in a crevasse in the glacier face, about 20 feet above the waterline. Like the first one, he was perfectly preserved in ice but still moving. Still alive somehow. "Jesus Christ," Lisa whispered. She grabbed her binoculars for a better look. How is he alive in there? The man in the ice was waving at us, trying to get our attention. He was pointing deeper into the glacier, toward a crack in the ice that looked like it went down for miles. I grabbed my climbing gear. "I'm going up there." "Are you crazy? That ice could collapse any second." But I was already putting on my crampons. Something about seeing these men trapped but alive drove me forward. I had to try to rescue them, even if I didn't understand how they'd survived. The climb up the glacier face was treacherous. The ice was slick and unstable, groaning under my weight. But my Tlingit grandfather had taught me to read ice when I was young, back when we still hunted seals in the traditional way. When I reached the crevasse, I could see the photographer clearly. His eyes were open and aware. His mouth moved silently behind the ice. I started chipping away with my ice axe, but like before, the ice was impossibly hard. Then I felt Lisa scream from below. I looked down and saw her backing away from our boat. The water around it was boiling with movement. Dark shapes were swimming beneath the surface, circling like sharks. "Dave," she yelled. "Get down from there, now." I looked back at the photographer, trapped in the ice. He was shaking his head frantically, pointing not at the water, but at the crack behind him. In the darkness of the glacier's interior, I saw lights, glowing, moving lights. That's when the ice started singing. It was the same Tlingit hunting song I'd heard earlier, but now it was coming from inside the glacier. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, singing in harmony. The sound made the ice vibrate under my hands and feet. I rappelled down as fast as I could, but when I hit the water level, Lisa wasn't at the boat anymore. She was standing on an iceberg about 50 feet away, and she wasn't alone. There were 3 of them surrounding her. They looked almost human, but their skin was translucent like ice. They were tall and graceful, moving with the fluid motion of sea otters. But their eyes held intelligence. Ancient, cold intelligence. One of them touched Lisa's hand, and I watched her skin start to change. It became pale and clear, like frost forming on a window. "Lisa!" I screamed, jumping into the Zodiac. She looked at me, and her eyes were already different. Still Lisa, but with something else behind them. Something that belonged in the deep, cold places of the world. "They're not trying to hurt me, Dave," she called out. Her voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from far away. "They're trying to save me." The ice creatures turned toward me as I approached. Up close, I could see they weren't monsters. They were people who had been changed, transformed. I could see traces of human features in their faces, human memories in their eyes. The one touching Lisa spoke in perfect English, though its voice sounded like wind through ice caves. "The warm ones are destroying the ice," it said. "Soon there will be nowhere for us to live. We need new ones to help us adapt." I realized with growing horror what was happening. These things, these Kosh-da-ka, that my grandfather had warned me about in his stories, they weren't just hunting for sport. They were trying to survive as their world melted away, and they were turning humans into creatures like themselves. "Let her go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The ice creature holding Lisa tilted its head like it was considering my request. "She will be safe with us, safer than in the warming world above." Lisa's transformation was spreading. Her breathing had slowed to almost nothing, and her skin was taking on that same translucent quality. But she was still fighting it. "Dave," she said, her voice getting weaker. "There's something you need to know." The third photographer. "He's not trapped. He's become one of them. He's been helping them hunt." The creature smiled, showing those sharp ice teeth. "He understands now. The ice remembers everything. All the stories, all the knowledge of your people. We can preserve it forever." That's when I understood. The Kosh-da-ka weren't just random spirits from native stories. They were the guardians of the ice, trying to save their world the only way they knew how. As the glaciers melted from climate change, they were taking humans to help them adapt and survive. But I couldn't let them take Lisa. I reached into my emergency kit and pulled out something I always carried but had never used. A small pouch of seal oil and cedar that my grandfather had blessed years ago. He'd told me it would protect me from ice spirits, but I'd thought it was just superstition. The moment I opened the pouch, the creatures recoiled. The scent of blessed seal oil was something they recognized and feared. "That won't hold us long," the lead creature said, "and your friend is already changing. Soon she won't want to leave." I could see he was right. Lisa was looking at me like she didn't quite recognize me anymore. The ice was calling to her, promising eternal cold and safety from a world that was getting too warm too fast. "There has to be another way," I said. "Some kind of agreement, like in the old days." The creature's expression changed. "You know the old agreements? My grandfather taught me some of them. The Tlingit and the Kosh-da-ka shared the ice for thousands of years." "Your grandfather." The creature moved closer, studying my face. "You are Raven Clan. From the line of the ice speakers." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what that meant. My grandfather had always said our family had a special relationship with the ice spirits, but I'd never believed him. "Then you can choose," the creature said. "Take your friend's place. One who speaks the old language would be more valuable to us than her." Lisa tried to speak, but her voice was barely a whisper now. The ice was claiming her faster than I'd expected. I had to make a decision. I could try to fight them, but there were too many, and they controlled the ice completely. I could try to run, but Lisa would be lost forever. Or I could make a trade. "If I come with you," I said, You let her go completely. No more hunting in this inlet. Find another place. The creature considered this. The ice is melting everywhere. There are fewer places each year. Then find a way to work with humans instead of changing them. There has to be a better solution. The lead creature looked at the others. They communicated in a language of whistles and clicks, like seals talking. Finally, it turned back to me. There is a place, deep in the glacier, where the old ice still remembers the agreements. If you can reach it and make the proper offering, we will consider your terms. I knew this was probably a trap, but it was the only chance I had to save Lisa, and maybe protect other people from being taken. How deep? I asked. The creature pointed to the crack in the glacier where I'd seen the moving lights, to the heart, where the first ice was formed. I looked at Lisa. She was fighting the transformation with everything she had, but she was losing. If I was going to save her, I had to act now. I'll do it, I said, but if I don't make it back, you let her go anyway. The creature almost smiled. If you don't make it back, the old agreements die with you, and we will have no choice but to take as many of your kind as we can. I grabbed my climbing gear and started toward the glacier face. Behind me, I could hear Lisa trying to call my name, but her voice was already more ice than human. The crack in the glacier was narrow and dark, but the ice walls glowed with their own light. As I climbed down into the heart of the glacier, I could hear them all around me. Hundreds of voices, singing the old songs, telling the old stories. And somewhere in that chorus, I heard my grandfather's voice, calling me deeper into the ice. The journey into the glacier's heart took 3 hours of careful climbing. The ice around me was older than anything I'd ever seen, blue-black and hard as stone. The walls were covered in carvings, symbols and pictures that looked like they'd been made thousands of years ago. At the bottom of the crevasse, I found a chamber carved from solid ice. In the center was a pool of water that had never frozen, despite being surrounded by glacial ice. The water glowed with the same light I'd seen in the creature's eyes. Standing around the pool were dozens of them, Koishda Ka of all ages. Some looked recently transformed, still showing human features. Others were so old they barely looked human at all. They were all singing, their voices creating harmonies that made the ice walls sing back. In the center of them all was an ancient one, bigger than the rest, with eyes like black ice. When it spoke, its voice sounded like glaciers grinding against each other. You have come to make an offering? Ice speaker. I pulled out the sacred seal oil my grandfather had given me. I offer this, and my own blood, to renew the old agreements. The ancient one studied me. Your grandfather was wise. He understood that we are not enemies, only different kinds of survivors. I cut my palm with my knife and let the blood drip into the glowing pool. The moment it touched the water, the pool blazed with light. Images flashed through my mind. Centuries of cooperation between my people and the ice spirits. Agreements that kept both sides safe and fed. The world is changing, I said. The ice is melting because of things humans are doing, but we can work together to find new ways to survive. The ancient one nodded slowly. Your friend above is already nearly changed. But if you will agree to be our voice in the human world, we will restore her and seek other solutions. What do you mean? Speak for us. Help your people understand that we are not monsters, but guardians. The ice holds memories of how the world was before it grew too warm. We can teach, if humans will learn. I thought about everything I'd seen. The fear, the transformation, the desperation of creatures whose entire world was disappearing. Maybe there was a way to help both sides. I agree, I said. But no more taking people without their choice, no more hunting. Agreed. But in return, you must carry our mark, so others of our kind will know you speak truth. The ancient one touched my forehead, and I felt cold spread through my entire body. Not the cold of dying, but the cold of deep water and old ice. When it was done, I could see in the dark like they could, and I could understand their songs. When I climbed back up to the surface, Lisa was waiting for me at the boat. She looked normal again, human, but I could see the experience had changed her. She would always remember what it felt like to become something else. The creatures, she asked, gone, moved on to somewhere safer. We never found the bodies of the 3 photographers, but we never found evidence of the ice creatures either. The official report blamed the disappearances on a glacier accident. I retired from the Park Service the next year and became a cultural liaison, helping scientists and traditional Tlingit elders work together on climate research. I travel around Alaska now, teaching people about the old agreements between humans and the natural world. Sometimes, late at night, I can hear them singing in my dreams. The Kushtaka, still out there somewhere, still trying to find their place in a warming world. And sometimes, when I'm near the ice, I sing back, keeping the old songs alive. Because some things are too important to forget, even when the world changes around them. The mark they gave me is still there, invisible to most people but clear as day to anyone who knows how to look. It means I've walked in the deep ice and come back alive. It means I've heard the songs that have been sung since the world was young. And it means that if you ever find yourself near the glaciers of Alaska, and you see ice formations that don't look quite right, you should remember what I've told you. The ice remembers everything, and sometimes it still hunts. My name is Sam Whitehawk, and I've been a park ranger in Alaska for 11 years. I flew helicopters in Vietnam before this job, saw things that would make most people lose sleep. But nothing I faced in that war prepared me for what hunts in the sky above Wrangell Street, Elias National Park. It was March of 1986 when everything changed. The winter had been brutal, even by Alaska standards. Mount Blackburn, our biggest peak at over 16,000 feet, had been throwing off strange weather patterns for weeks. The volcanic crater had been more active than usual, sending up steam clouds that twisted in ways that didn't make sense. I'm half Otna, half Irish. My grandfather used to tell me stories about the Chelta Didi, sky spirits that steal souls at high altitude. I never believed those old tales. Military training teaches you to trust facts, equipment, and procedures. But sometimes the old ways know things that modern minds can't understand. The call came in at 0800 hours on a Tuesday morning. 5 expert climbers were 3 days overdue from a winter ascent of Mount Blackburn. These weren't weekend hikers, they were professionals with satellite beacons, top-grade gear, and enough experience to climb Everest blindfolded. Wrangell Mountain Rescue. This is base, crackled the radio. We've got a code red missing persons. Elite climbing team hasn't checked in for 72 hours. I grabbed my flight gear and headed for the helicopter. The weather was nasty, winds gusting to 50 miles per hour and visibility down to maybe half a mile. But people die fast at altitude in March. Every hour counted. My partner Maria Clearwater was already prepping the rescue equipment when I reached the hangar. She'd been doing mountain rescue for 8 years and knew these peaks better than anyone. Winds coming from the wrong direction, she said, checking the weather instruments. It's like it's flowing upward instead of down the mountain. I fired up the helicopter and we lifted off into gray, swirling clouds. As we climbed toward the 12,000-foot level where the team had made their last camp, the radio started picking up strange interference. Static, mixed with what sounded almost like singing. High, thin voices that made my skin crawl. "You hearing that?" I asked Maria through the headset. She nodded, her face grim. "Sounds like the old wind songs my grandmother used to hum. But that's impossible at this altitude." The first sign of trouble appeared at 11,500 feet. We found the climbing team's base camp, but it looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. Expensive equipment was scattered everywhere. Oxygen tanks, climbing ropes, emergency shelters. But all the climbers' personal gear was gone. I set the helicopter down on a flat section of glacier, and we did a ground search. The footprints in the snow told a strange story. 5 sets of boot prints led away from camp, but they seemed to get lighter as they went higher. By the time we followed them to 13,000 feet, the prints were barely visible, as if the climbers had been walking on air. "This doesn't make sense," Maria said, kneeling next to one of the tracks. "Look at this. The print starts normal, but halfway through it changes. These marks here. They look almost like bird claws." I checked the GPS readings from the climber's emergency beacon. The signal was still active, but it showed them at 18,000 feet, 2,000 feet higher than the mountain's actual peak. The equipment had to be malfunctioning. As we climbed back toward the helicopter, the wind started acting strange. Instead of the usual downslope flow you'd expect on a mountain, the air was moving upward in steady currents. My altimeter began giving impossible readings, showing we were 500 feet higher than we actually were. That's when we heard the voices. They came from above, carried on the wind. Human voices, calling for help in English and what sounded like Atna, but there was nothing above us except empty sky and the distant peak of Mount Blackburn. "Sam," Maria whispered, grabbing my arm. "Look, high above us, barely visible against the gray clouds, something was moving." At first I thought it might be birds, but they were too big and flying in formation like military aircraft. As we watched, one of the shapes broke away from the group and swooped lower. For just a moment, before it disappeared back into the clouds, I saw something that made my blood freeze. It had wings like an eagle, but the body and head were human. And it was carrying something in its talons, something that looked like climbing gear. I've seen a lot of things in my life. Flew through enemy fire in Vietnam, pulled bodies out of crashed planes, worked rescue in weather that would kill most people. But I'd never seen anything that made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. Until that moment, on Mount Blackburn, when I first glimpsed what my grandfather's stories had warned about all along. We flew back to base that evening with more questions than answers. I filed my initial report, but I left out the part about the winged figures. Who would believe that? Instead, I focused on the evidence: abandoned equipment, strange weather patterns, GPS malfunctions. But I couldn't stop thinking about what we'd seen. The next morning brought worse news. The Weather Service reported that all aircraft in the area were experiencing navigation problems near Mount Blackburn. Compasses were spinning wildly, altimeters were giving false readings, and radio communications were being disrupted by interference that sounded like singing. "We need to go back up there," I told Maria as we prepared for another search flight. "Those climbers are still alive somewhere. The beacon signal is still transmitting." Maria had been quiet all morning. She came from a traditional Atna family and understood the old stories better than I did. "My grandmother always said the Cheltady hunt during the volcanic seasons," she said. "When the mountain spirits are restless." I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but the evidence was piling up. The volcanic activity on Mount Blackburn had increased dramatically in the past month. Steam vents that had been dormant for decades were now active. The whole mountain seemed to be waking up from a long sleep. We lifted off at first light and headed straight for the 14,000-foot level. The weather was clearer today, and we could see the full scope of the climbing route the missing team had attempted. It was a nearly vertical wall of ice and rock that should have been impossible to climb without ropes and anchors. But halfway up that wall, we found something that changed everything. One of the missing climbers was there, suspended in midair 200 feet above the nearest ledge. He was alive, conscious, and somehow floating without any visible support. His climbing rope hung loose below him, not attached to anything. I brought the helicopter in as close as I dared. Through the side window, I could see the climber's face. His eyes were wide with terror, but he seemed unable to move or speak. He was just hanging there in empty air, as if invisible hands were holding him up. "How is this possible?" Maria breathed into her headset. I tried to get close enough to drop him a rescue line, but something was wrong with the helicopter. The controls were fighting me, as if the aircraft was being pushed around by forces I couldn't see. The altimeter showed we were at 16,000 feet, but Mount Blackburn's summit was visible below us. That's when I saw them clearly for the first time. 3 massive winged creatures circled the suspended climber like vultures around roadkill. They had human torsos and faces, but their arms had transformed into huge feathered wings. Their legs ended in sharp talons, and their eyes glowed with an intelligence that was definitely not animal. One of them looked directly at me through the helicopter's windscreen. When it opened its mouth, I heard its voice inside my head, speaking in the Atna language my grandfather had taught me as a child. "This is our hunting ground. Leave now, or join him in the sky." The creature gestured toward the floating climber, and suddenly the man began to rise higher into the air. He was moving upward at a steady pace, his arms and legs limp, his face frozen in silent terror. I tried to follow, but the helicopter's engine started stuttering. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. We were losing power, losing altitude, and losing our only chance to save the climber. "We have to get out of here," Maria shouted. "The engine's failing." I managed to get us back to a safe landing zone at 10,000 feet, but I knew we were dealing with something beyond normal search and rescue procedures. The missing climbers weren't lost, they were being taken by creatures that shouldn't exist. That evening, I called my Uncle Joe, one of the few traditional Atna elders still living. I told him everything we'd seen, expecting him to think I'd lost my mind from too much thin air. Instead, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "The Chaltaidi have been sleeping for many years, but when the mountain bleeds fire and the sky spirits are hungry, they wake up to hunt. Your grandfather knew this. He carried special protection when he flew near the sacred peaks." "What kind of protection?" I asked. "Meet me tomorrow morning. Bring your climbing gear and your strongest heart. If you're going to face the sky spirits, you'll need more than helicopter and radio." I hung up the phone, knowing that everything I'd believed about the world was about to change. Somewhere on Mount Blackburn, 4 climbers were still missing, and now I understood that saving them would require more than modern rescue techniques. It would require facing creatures that had been hunting in these skies since before humans learned to fly. Uncle Joe met us at the ranger station before dawn. He was carrying an old leather bag that smelled of sage and something else I couldn't identify. From it, he pulled out items I'd never seen before: eagle feathers wrapped with copper wire, small carved bones, and arrows with points made from what looked like meteorite iron. "Your grandfather made these," he said, handing me one of the arrows. "They're meant for hunting things that fly where they shouldn't." Maria examined the carved bones. "These are eagle spirit bones. My grandmother had some like this. They're supposed to protect against sky spirits." "Chaltaidi don't just hunt," Uncle Joe explained. "They transform. They take humans and make them into servants, creatures that can fly between our world and theirs. But the process takes time. If we can find the missing climbers within 3 days, there might still be hope." We loaded the traditional items into the helicopter along with our regular rescue gear. I felt foolish carrying mystical arrows and eagle bones, but after what I'd seen yesterday, I was willing to try anything. The flight back to Mount Blackburn was different this time. As soon as we reached 12,000 feet, the radio started picking up voices again. But now I could understand some of what they were saying. Mixed in with the Atna wind songs were English words: "Help us, can't come down, they're changing us." The climbers are trying to communicate, Maria realized. They're still conscious. We found the second climber at 14,500 feet, standing on a vertical ice wall as if it were flat ground. She was a woman in her 30s, still wearing her climbing gear, but somehow able to defy gravity. When she saw our helicopter, she waved, but she couldn't step away from the wall. "Can you hear me?" I called through the helicopter's external speaker. She nodded and pointed upward. Following her gesture, I saw something that made my stomach drop. The other 3 climbers were visible higher up the mountain, but they weren't on the ground anymore. They were floating in formation with a group of the winged creatures, moving through the air like they were learning to fly. "They're being taught," Maria whispered. "The Chaltaidi are teaching them to become like them." The woman on the ice wall called up to us, her voice carried by the strange wind patterns. "They took our oxygen, replaced it with something else. We can breathe the thin air now, but we can't come down." I tried to bring the helicopter close enough to extract her, but the same invisible forces from yesterday pushed us away. Every time I got within 50 feet, the aircraft would suddenly drop or lurch sideways. The Chaltaidi were protecting their territory. That's when Maria did something I'll never forget. She clipped into a rescue harness and prepared to rappel down to the trapped woman. "Don't," I warned her. "If they take you too." "Someone has to try," she said. "I've got the protection bones. Maybe they'll help." She dropped down on the rescue line, and for a moment it looked like it might work. She reached the woman and began setting up evacuation harness. But as they prepared to ascend, the air around them began to shimmer. 3 of the winged creatures dove down from above. They were massive up close, 12-foot wingspan, bodies that were half human and half eagle. Their leader spoke in perfect English. "The woman may choose. Join us willingly, or watch your friend become like us." "Run," the trapped climber shouted to Maria. "Get back to the helicopter." But it was too late. 2 of the creatures grabbed Maria by the arms and lifted her into the air. I watched in horror as they carried her straight up the side of the mountain, moving faster than my helicopter could follow. For 3 hours, I circled the peak, looking for any sign of Maria or the creatures. The GPS showed her emergency beacon at impossible altitudes, sometimes 20,000 feet, sometimes only 8,000 feet, as if she was being carried up and down through the air. Finally, just as my fuel was running low, They brought her back. The creatures descended from the clouds carrying Maria between them. But she looked different. Her skin had a pale, almost translucent quality, and her eyes had changed color from brown to a bright amber. When they set her down on a ledge near the helicopter, she moved with an unnatural grace. "I'm okay," she called out, but her voice sounded strange, higher-pitched, with an echo like wind through canyon walls. "They showed me things, Sam. The whole range, from above the clouds. They're not evil. They're protecting something." I managed to get close enough to extract her. But as she climbed into the helicopter, I could see that the change in her was more than just physical. She kept looking up at the sky with a longing expression, as if she belonged up there now instead of on the ground. "What did they show you?" I asked as we flew back toward base. "Their nests," she said, "in the volcanic crater. They've been breeding there for thousands of years, but something's wrong with the mountain. The old balance is breaking. They need help to fix it." She turned to look at me with those amber eyes, and I saw something that chilled me more than the Arctic wind. She was changing, becoming something between human and Cheltaedi, and part of her wanted to go back to them. "We have to return tomorrow," she said, "to the crater rim. That's where the others are being held. That's where we can save them." I knew it was a trap. I knew the creatures were using Maria to lure me into their territory. But I also knew that 4 people were still up there, transforming into something inhuman with each passing hour. Sometimes the only choice is between bad and worse. And sometimes you have to fly straight into danger to have any chance of bringing people home. We climbed toward Mount Blackburn's crater rim at first light, carrying Uncle Joe's protective items and what felt like the last hope for the missing climbers. Maria was quiet during the flight, but I could see her looking up through the helicopter's windows with that same longing expression. At 16,000 feet, we entered the Cheltaedi's territory. The volcanic crater was active, sending up steam clouds that glowed with an inner light. But it wasn't the geological activity that took my breath away. It was what lived there. Dozens of the winged creatures perched on the crater's rim and the rocky spires around it. They ranged in size from juveniles with 8-foot wingspans to ancient giants whose wings could have covered a small aircraft. At the center of their colony, I could see structures that looked like nests, but made from materials that gleamed like metal and crystal. And there, floating above the crater in formation with a group of young Cheltaedi, were the 3 missing climbers. They were still recognizably human, but their bodies had changed. Their arms had elongated, growing what looked like the beginnings of feathers. Their legs were becoming more bird-like, and their faces had the sharp, predatory look of raptors. But their eyes still held human intelligence. The largest Cheltaedi, the one who had spoken to us before, rose from the crater and flew toward our helicopter. This time, when it communicated, I could hear its voice both aloud and in my mind. "Park Ranger Samuel Whitehawk," it said, "grandson of Thomas Whitehawk, who flew the old paths with respect. Your people once understood the compact between earth and sky. We have kept the balance for 10,000 winters, but now the mountain sickness spreads, and we must expand our territory to survive." I looked down at the volcanic crater and understood what it meant. The increased geological activity wasn't just natural, it was killing the Cheltaedi's traditional nesting grounds. They were being forced to hunt in areas where humans traveled. "Let the climbers go," I said through the helicopter's external speaker. "They don't belong in your world." "They chose," the creature replied. "Each one faced the transformation willingly rather than die in the cold. They are becoming bridges between our peoples, as was done in the ancient times." Maria leaned forward in her seat. "The balance," she whispered. "They need human intelligence to navigate the modern world. Helicopters, aircraft, radio frequencies, things that didn't exist when the old compact was made." The lead Cheltaedi tilted its head, studying her. "The woman understands. She has breathed our air and seen through our eyes. She knows what must be done." That's when I realized the terrible truth. The Cheltaedi weren't just hunting randomly. They were adapting to a world full of human aircraft, trying to find a way to coexist with modern aviation while protecting their ancient territory. The climbers were being transformed into scouts and translators, beings who could move between the human and spirit worlds. But I also understood something the creatures might not have considered. The missing climbers had families, friends, lives they'd been torn away from. Whatever cosmic balance they were trying to maintain, It couldn't justify turning people into something they'd never chosen to become. I pulled out one of Uncle Joe's wind arrows and fitted it to the traditional bow he'd given me. "I'm sorry," I called to the Chelta 80 leader, "but I can't let you keep them." The creature's eyes flashed with what might have been respect. "Then you understand the old ways. Trial by combat, human against sky spirit, with the prisoner's fate decided by victory." What happened next was the most intense aerial battle of my life. The Chelta 80 attacked, not with claws and beaks, but with the air itself. They created wind shears that sent the helicopter spinning, generated downdrafts that slammed us toward the crater rim, and somehow made the thin air even thinner until my oxygen equipment struggled to keep me conscious. I fought back with everything I'd learned in Vietnam and 11 years of mountain flying, using the helicopter's rotor wash to disrupt their formation, diving into thermals to escape their wind attacks, and firing Uncle Joe's arrows whenever I could get a clear shot. The arrows worked. When they struck the creatures, they didn't wound them physically, but they seemed to break whatever power allowed them to control the air currents. Chelta 80 hit by the arrows lost altitude, their formation broke apart, and for brief moments the wind patterns returned to normal. But there were too many of them, and they were fighting on their home territory. Just as my fuel was running critically low and the creatures were closing in for a final attack, Maria made her choice. She'd been changing throughout the battle, her amber eyes growing brighter and her movements becoming more fluid. Now she opened the helicopter door and stepped out into thin air. Not falling, but floating as the transformed climbers did. "I'll hold them off," she called back to me, her voice now carrying the same wind-song quality as the Chelta 80. "Get the others and get out of here." She flew, toward the attacking creatures, moving with a grace and speed that matched their own. I watched her engage their leader in aerial combat above the volcanic crater, human determination enhanced by Chelta 80 abilities. The battle gave me the opening I needed. While the sky spirits were distracted, I managed to reach the 3 floating climbers. Using the last of Uncle Joe's arrows, I was able to disrupt whatever force was keeping them airborne. They dropped onto a wide ledge, their partial transformations reversed enough that they could move under their own power. Getting them into the helicopter took every trick I'd learned in 11 years of mountain rescue. The wind was fighting me, the volcanic gases were making the engine run rough, and Chelta 80 kept diving at us from all directions. But I got them out. As we descended from the crater rim, I looked back to see Maria still locked in aerial combat with the Chelta 80 leader. They moved like dancers, spinning and diving through the steam clouds, testing each other's skill and determination. Then, just as we dropped below the crater rim and lost sight of the battle, I saw them both fall. I never found Maria's body. The official search lasted 2 weeks, but we all knew the mountain had claimed her. The official report listed her death as a helicopter crash during a rescue operation. Mechanical failure due to extreme altitude and volcanic conditions. The 3 climbers we rescued survived, but they were forever changed. They had enhanced lung capacity that let them function at altitude without oxygen, and their reflexes had improved dramatically. 2 of them became professional mountain guides, specializing in routes that other climbers considered impossible. The 3rd became a pilot, flying rescue missions in conditions that would ground other aircraft. They never talked publicly about what happened on Mount Blackburn, but sometimes, late at night over drinks, they'd mention dreams of flying above the clouds and hearing wind songs in languages no human had ever learned. The official investigation was handled by a joint team from the FAA and military intelligence. All our helicopter footage was confiscated, and the area around Mount Blackburn's crater rim was quietly designated as environmentally sensitive, restricted airspace. No aircraft are allowed above 14,000 feet without special permits that are never actually granted. I resigned from the Park Service 6 months later. Couldn't bring myself to fly rescue missions anymore, knowing what was up there waiting in the thin air above the peaks. Instead, I started working with Uncle Joe and the other Otna elders, learning the traditional knowledge that modern aviation had forgotten. Now I teach a special course for native pilots. How to recognize the signs that you're entering Chelta 80 territory, what the old protection ceremonies mean, and why some airspace should be respected rather than conquered. The FAA doesn't officially recognize my program, but they don't shut it down either. Too many strange incidents have been reported in Alaska's high peaks for them to ignore completely. Last month, a tourist helicopter reported engine trouble near Mount Blackburn. The pilot managed to land safely, but he described seeing large birds with human faces circling his aircraft before the mechanical problems started. His passengers thought he was suffering from altitude sickness. I know better. The balance that Uncle Joe talked about is still broken. The volcanic activity is getting worse, pushing the Chelta eddy into areas where they encounter human aircraft more frequently. Sooner or later, there's going to be another incident like the one that took Maria and nearly took those climbers. That's why I'm telling you this story. If you're planning to fly in Alaska's high mountains, especially around the volcanic peaks, you need to understand what you might be sharing the sky with. The Chelta eddy aren't evil. They're protecting territory that was theirs long before humans learned to fly. But they will defend it, and they have abilities that your instruments can't detect and your training can't prepare you for. Listen for the wind songs on your radio frequencies. Watch for unusual aircraft behavior near volcanic peaks. If birds won't fly in an area, maybe you shouldn't either. And if you ever see winged figures that are too big to be eagles and too intelligent to be animals, don't try to investigate. Land immediately, get to low altitude, and remember that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Because somewhere above the clouds, in air too thin for human lungs and too wild for human hearts, ancient guardians still patrol the sky. They remember the old compact between earth and air, between human ambition and natural law. And they're still hunting. Asterisk. Total word count. Approximately 4,200 words. Asterisk.